go. Hey everybody, it's Monday again, and this Monday, it's Sylvia Massy time. Hi Sylvia.
Hi, Andrew.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good, good. We've already established it's not quite as hot where you are as it is where I am, and I shouldn't really complain, but it's a little sticky here. But you're up in Ashland, Oregon, is this correct?
That's right. And the temperature is pretty much perfect. Yeah, almost every day it's perfect.
Wow. So it's like a tropical island, yet it's in Oregon.
No, it's actually it did cool down this week, so which was better. But I'm usually indoors, so I don't really know what's going on outside.
Right,
Yeah.
right. As a lot of us, as you can tell from our fine complexions. Yeah, yeah, pasty face. So, as we usually like to do with these things, we like to start at the very beginning, if that's all right. I mean, we have to get all the way up to the present, so you can tell us a little bit about where you are and the ridiculously cool microphone that's sitting next to you. I mean, actually, we could start with the microphone if you want, and then go back in time. Should we
Well,
start there? Because that microphone, I would assume, is slightly older than you.
yes, this is a Marconi round Sykes dynamic mic. It's actually the first produced dynamic mic out there.
Wow.
Captain Round developed the technology for it. It's an early dynamic. It's super robust. It's super heavy, and yeah, and it's amazing thing.
And
I haven't actually tried it yet.
what's the diaphragm? Is the diaphragm the bit just in the very middle of the center circle, or?
I believe that's it. I'm still learning about this microphone, but I saw one of these round Sykes in the BBC. And what was it? That EMI archive in outside of London in Hayes, and it was one of the mics that the Royals used.
Oh, right.
So it's got a good pedigree, but this is basically your first dynamic mic, and I just like having it around. It's just so
It's
burly.
pretty awesome. And did that wood come with it, or did you have to make the stand for it?
We didn't make the stand, but it was probably made by the previous owner in the Paquette collection.
Right.
Probably
Right.
Joe Paquette, who's the son of Bob Paquette, who had this incredible microphone collection that my partner Chris and I recently purchased. It's a museum, basically.
Yeah, we'll definitely get back to that because that's amazing.
Good.
But can we, if you don't mind, can we go all the way back to the beginning to Flint? Because
oh my God.
Well, we're not going to spend much time there, I don't think. Because I don't think you didn't make that many records in Flint.
Right.
But
No.
You were born in Flint, right? But then grew up in Denver. Is that right?
Yeah.
So the formative years. The reason I always like to go back to the beginning is because every person I've talked to has kind of a similar yet completely different way into sort of knowing that record making was even a thing. Some of them had parents who were musicians and they would go to a studio or something like that. Some of them had absolutely no idea until they were much older and then like wandered into a studio to get a gig, and then all of a sudden off they went and had this amazing career. So I know that you were a musician and you played in bands, including the Hats. Now, I'm not sure the genre of the Hats, but we'll get to the bands in a bit because I think that was a little bit later. But when you were a kid, you were into recording already, right? Doing these radio shows.
Yeah. Well, back in Flint, I was born in Flint, Michigan, and my father was an engineer for General Motors, and my mom was an opera singer in the metropolitan of that area, and she was quite a good opera singer, and but she gave up that career to be a mom, which I really appreciate. But you can see that I had both of these effects on my early childhood, where there was always music going on in the house, and my father was always building things. And when I was 2, he had built an ICO kit tape recorder and set it up with a microphone and just had me talk into the microphone while putting the tape recorder on sound, and it would delay.
Wow.
And it was fascinating as a kid. I sat for hours, and those tapes are, I think I've got them still, but where I'm just a baby and with a microphone. And I swear that had to be imprinted into my
Oh, absolutely. Just the idea that
memory.
you can create a world with a
Well, it
cassette
was so
machine and a
fascinating. It was like
microphone.
a toy for me to be able to make these sounds and then have it repeat. And I understood what was going on basically. And but my father was also mechanically minded in building. Goodness, what's going on? The sun got really bright back here. We have a skylight.
Nice.
Oh, I see.
So it's not UFOs.
No, it's not UFOs, but it just got really bright in here all of a sudden. I see it must be windy outside. Um, so where were we? We're talking about Flint.
Yeah, and about
Right.
your dad as an engineer. So
Right. And so he and I would have projects together when I was a little bit older, and he taught me how to build go-karts and such. So I became familiar with tools, and basically he had an elaborate shop, which I loved to just hang around in. And then my mom was still performing when I was a toddler. So I would go to her performances and sit on my great aunt's lap and watch her on stage. So all this stuff really made a big imprint on my childhood.
right. It's amazing. I mean, you can see how that would immediately just you realize it exists. The idea of manipulating sound in some way is there. And then what about these radio shows you did with like neighborhood kids and stuff? Because I think this points to your career as a producer very early on.
Well, yeah, sound effects became fun for me. And my father had a collection of sound effect records, which was the most fun. Some of them really were fun and funny. So I would listen to those sound effects records and imagine how, and my imagination would go wild. So when I was, I think about 8 or 9, I had a cassette recorder, and I invited the neighborhood kids to come in, and I gave them all a script. And then
That you'd
I had
written.
yeah, right. And then I had a turntable, and then my tape recorder separate. And then I would play sound effects and theme music on the turntable between our takes, basically, so that it was like a real show. And I just loved that. It was one of my favorite things to do. I wasn't really doing recording of music at that time. I was just using sound effects and making my own little radio shows. It was a lot of fun.
Do you happen to remember the plot or a title of any one of these?
Yeah,
You
one
probably
was
remember them
about
all word for word, don't you?
well, not really, but one was about Tarzan, I think. And I think I played Tarzan because I had the lowest voice of everybody.
Oh, that's great. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, when did you start playing, and what did you start playing when you became a
Mm.
musician as well?
Yeah, I was a flute player in elementary, and I think that was a very important thing to have some kind of information about music early. I eventually played in a marching band in high school. We went to, I grew up in outside of Denver, in Golden, Colorado, home of Coors beer.
Mm.
But we took a high school trip to New York, and I marched in the Thanksgiving Day parade, and that was my first foray outside of home turf, and that was a big deal for
Wow,
me to
yeah.
travel.
I
Yeah,
can imagine. I mean, high school age, getting to Manhattan when you hadn't really gone anywhere like that must have been
right,
pretty something or
big.
other.
Yeah.
Was it scary or exciting or both?
Oh, everything. And of course, I was prone to get in trouble, so I did. I had my buddies there, and and I was just starting to really get into trouble. So, but yes, the flute, playing the flute wasn't like the cool instrument in high school. The drummers and the guitar players and the sax players were always way cooler. But I had some great teachers, music teachers, and Mr. Sutton was one of my favorite teachers, and he brought a synthesizer, early sequencer into the classroom, and we played around with it. And he also had us do a multi-track recording, which I think about today, and I'm amazed that he was having us kids do multi-track recording on a 4-track in, this was had to have been 1970,
Wow.
72, something like that. It's pretty early for that kind of stuff in school.
That's amazing. It's huge. It is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a really good music department in my school, and that made all the difference.
Where did you grow up?
Well, Ohio for a bit, and then from 4th grade on, I was on Long Island. So
Okay. That makes sense.
Strong Island.
I hear it in your...
Well, you hear it. It's on this microphone. Whenever I do
only on that microphone.
Yeah, well, no, on any microphone. When in person, I don't sound too much like anything, but on a microphone, apparently I sound quite a bit like Howard Stern. So,
Oh, yeah.
so anyway, if I say something really misogynist and offensive, you'll recognize Howard a bit more. But okay, but enough about me. So, okay, so you're starting to be a bit of a troublemaker. You're still in Golden. So eventually, I mean, we can fill in some blanks if you want to, but you get shipped off to your dad's, who's in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah,
And
I was way too much of a handful for my mom at that point. I think I was 16, and she called up my dad and said, I can't handle her anymore. You got to take her. So I moved out to live with him in the Bay Area in Concord, California. And I continued to kind of go to high school, but not really. And I eventually dropped out.
Right. But you were playing in bands at this point, right? Or did that come a little bit later?
That was a little later. Incredibly, I did get my GED. And then my father gave me the opportunity after a year of just taking a break, a vacation from school. He said, I'll pay for your rent if you pay for your tuition to go to the state college or to the state university in Chico. I chose Chico because it was the best party town, of course. So,
wow.
But I
See,
did
Santa
it.
Cruz would have something to
yeah.
say about that, but I think up there, sure.
Yeah, and I did. I went to Chico State. I went for about 4 years, never graduated, but I was in the broadcast program there. And there was no recording program at that time. There was no, music production at all. But I did learn to use the production equipment in the production studios in the broadcasting curriculum. And that was a huge thing. I started working at radio in town in Butte County right away. Like I got 2 or 3 jobs doing shifts. And then I also started playing music in bands. At first I was playing flute in a reggae band, which then I traded out for a melodica.
Nice.
And then I started singing because luckily my mom gave me some good pipes. So I started singing in the band, and then eventually started playing some guitar. But yeah, that was my first foray into live performance. And was in college.
But were you working as an engineer at the stations, or what were you doing at the radio stations?
I had an on-air shift, and then I was also doing radio production.
Right.
The commercial production, which is a big part of radio. And that was where things changed for me when I realized post-university that working in radio wasn't about music at all. It was about commercial production. So, and that kind of made me not like it as much. So I realized, well, what I really need to do is to learn how to record music.
Right. So you'd already decided that you wanted to be involved in music in some
Mm,
way.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. This was the late 70s, and music, it was just, punk rock was just coming in, and there was some great soul music happening too. Uh, and I was very much into reggae, and my band in college was called the Hats. You mentioned them before, but we did ska reggae music, which was fun and very popular at the time with the two-tone
Yeah,
label.
and a huge scene in the Bay Area too that continued
Yeah,
all the way through the
fun.
80s. Great
Yeah, it
bands.
was.
The Uptones were one of my
Yes,
favorite bands from
right.
back then.
Beat. Yeah,
Yeah.
English beat. Um, yeah, madness. There was so much great music. Plus the other music at the time, the kind of the indie, the precursors to the indie rock that we got back to in the 90s. But so yeah, music was really really interesting to me, and I loved it. I got into new wave quite a bit in the early 80s, and loved the Depeche Mode and the Devo in particular because of their sense of humor. And um, so yeah, I really got into the music. That's where I wanted to be, and eventually just got out of radio entirely and went straight into music production. And it was a bit of a uh, interesting set of circumstances that got me into my first music studio, because I through my father teaching me how to build cars, I built a car. I took an old Edsel 59 Edsel 58. It was a 59, and I restored it. And it took me a year to restore this old thing. And I got it out of the paint shop. And 2 days later, damn it, if the thing didn't catch on fire and just burn, and it was a disaster. I mean, I lost my
Wow.
car, but
Do we know the origins of this fire?
yeah, it was the carburetor. The carburetor was spilling gas over the manifold or
Oh.
something, and it just. So,
Oh.
apparently, I'm not that great of an auto mechanic.
Well, you'd only done one, I mean, it's
Yeah, but yeah. On the other hand, the insurance settlement was enough that I was able to get another car and have a little breathing room, enough time to get established in a new career, which was music recording. And I started at a studio called Bear West in San Francisco, and I would commute every day into the city and work at this funky little studio with an API console. And I got to know it very well.
and what kind of sessions were they doing there?
They had two rooms, and there was an 8-track room, which was the one I started in. And I started as an engineer slash producer right away. I uh, but then they had a 24-track analog in the main room, and they were doing some jazz. Bobby Hutcherson was one
Right?
uh, artist that came in during that time, and New Riders of the Purple Sage came in, and it was good music. It was these were not the top notch sessions, because those would go over to Fantasy
Yeah.
in the East Bay, but we had a busy time there, and I would get all the junior projects in the B room working on the 8-track, and I got to know that 8-track really well. I think it was an Otari.
Wow. So because you could run the equipment, that was it. They just said go to town, there you go. And so in terms of recording itself, did you have any mentors or anything? Because like one of the things you're a ridiculously good engineer all the way around, but one of the things you are meticulous about is like drum recording and multi-mic drum recording, not 3-mic drum recording, but phase and all that. And like, was that just because you came from the more technical background and figured it out, or did you have some mentors come through that studio, or like where did that come from?
Well, honestly, the first engineer I assisted at Bear West was Mark Needham,
There you go. All right.
right?
Yeah.
And then soon after that, I was working at another studio called Starlight Sound, and I was assisting Matt Wallace.
Wow.
And Matt, I have to say, was my inspiration for recording drums, and he was so free to just do anything, especially with drum recording. And he taught me so much about just breaking the rules. I think that I could credit him with a lot of how the way I think. The other thing about just the freedom of doing things wrong is just because I never had a formal education for music recording. I was experimenting right from the beginning and guessing a lot and asking a lot of questions. But I made a lot of mistakes. There was plenty of mistakes and plenty of doing things that wasn't necessarily right, which I think carries through to the way I work today in some ways. I think formal education is good. I can't stress that enough. But if you don't have education, that should not preclude you from being able to do this.
No, well, I mean, obviously you get your education with Mark Needham and Matt Wallace, sitting in front of you, and you got to keep up with them. And in some ways, I mean, I guess you're more open and aware when that's like some of your first sessions ever than you would be coming out of any sort of longer educational thing, because you'd think you already knew some things or whatever, and you'd be comparing them. Whereas this is how it's done, basically. And those are some pretty good guys to learn from.
Well, I had no idea at the time that we would become friends and I would still know them both today, I mean, that's the crazy thing about this whole industry, is that the people that you meet, expect to know them 30 years from now, because the community is very small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the web is strong.
Yes.
So, all right, now just while we're pulling things out of the long distant past, there are reports that you are also in an all-female punk band and an all-female metal band. But I don't have band names for either of those. And
yes, there was a lot of bands, actually. And during the time I was at Bear West, I was doing a lot of recording on the off time, not necessarily having gotten permission from the owner of the studio, but a lot of sneaking. So I worked with a group. We had Reflector was one. Ice Minus was another.
Ice Minus.
The Malibu Barbie was another.
Was that the punk band or the metal band?
That was the metal band.
Yeah.
And then Rude Girl was another, which I was basically recording them, but also adding vocals and doing other things. So it became, my sneaking into the studio late at night to record my own projects actually kind of pushed me into working with other people on their projects, because the stuff we were working on was turning out pretty good and I had access to the rooms. So other people would ask me to work on their projects. And then it became obvious that I was doing better with other people's projects than my own. So it just kind of continued that way. But that's where I got my production chops initially.
Right. So just doing it, basically. It's because you came out of the gate as a producer, and obviously you've got some, because everybody has some odd assisting credits at the very beginning, but I think for you that's more Larrabee times, so that's a couple years down the road from this. But yeah. So I'd love to hear, because I know that one of the main gigs you did up there was the Sea Hags, which you made that record with Kirk Hammet. And I'd love to hear about how that happened, how you met Kirk, how you knew the band. How did that coalesce after just sort of dropping yourself into the scene?
Yeah, I started working at a studio called CD Presents, which was an offshoot of the label CD Presents, and the Avengers were on that label. It was kind of a punk label. The early Flaming Lips records actually were on that label. And there was a compilation series of records, vinyl, that was called Rat Music for Rat People. And so I got to work on that. And in doing that, I worked with some great punk musicians, the Adolescents, Skid Roper,
Wow.
Doggy Style. There's a bunch of really good punk, true punk, Bay Area punk. And then let's see, where were we?
Where we're
We're talking
leading up to
about
Kirk and the Sea
with the
Hags
Kirk.
eventually.
So Paul Rat was the fellow who put out these compilations, and Rat had the idea of putting out on Boner Records this band Sea Hags, which was really a great live band in San Francisco at the time. And he asked if I would, run the studio and do the engineering and work with this young guitar player named Kirk Hammet as a co-producer and co-produce this project. I love this band, the Sea Hags. Wow, this was a sound that I hadn't really heard before. It was raw, but it was rock. It wasn't punk, but it was this really aggressive style of rock that was real. It was genuine. And we did this record, and it's really kind of bone dry with just big drum room sounds, but it sounded live. And it turned out really good. And I got along brilliantly with Kirk. He was really young then and had just joined Metallica I think they had just finished, or they were still working on Master of Puppets. So he was available for this project. We finished it. And Paul, I don't even think put out the record. Paul shopped it, and it was picked up by Chrysalis. So Chrysalis wanted to re-record the whole record, which was a huge disappointment for me, because I thought, well, this record is damn good the way it is. Why don't you just, put out this record? Here's my chance to get into the big time,
Right.
And so instead of just releasing that record that we had done, Chrysalis opted to re-record it and record it with Mike Klink, who had just started on the Guns N' Roses thing.
Right.
And I realized at that point, oh my God, well, if I'm going to compete at all, I'm going to have to go to LA, because Mike was in LA. The whole industry was in LA, and they weren't going to give any, Bay Area engineer producer a chance. So I packed up my bags and moved to LA. It was
Wow.
very traumatic, and it was really risky, but I did it. Got into town and visited all the studios with my resume in hand, and including, Capitol. I had my perfect resume. I was dressed really nicely and went in there and pretty much had the door slammed in my face with every single one. I just realized that you just don't, all the time that I spent in San Francisco or other places recording didn't matter. You're starting from scratch when you move into Los Angeles. So it took a while. I took a job at Tower Records.
Well, but that
Sunset.
did a lot for you, though. I mean, that's where
Incredibly.
the rest of it all came from. But it's interesting, because when in different places, the going around all of the studios thing seems to be different, because I did it once in New York and was pretty much the same experience you had, where it was like, get out of here, kid, Like, okay. And I did get a call back and ended up like working nights answering the phone at a studio, which was amazing. It was still like the best job I've ever had, like so exciting. But when you're in, like, if you had decided to move to the Bay Area and done the same thing, most likely there would have been a bit more of a, well, okay, we don't have anything, but why don't we? Because talking to Tony Maserati, even in New York, that was kind of how his thing went, is he went around to all the different studios, and someone said, well, we don't need somebody, but someone else knows somebody, and get on the phone like, okay, go to that studio now, and things happen. So it's just a shame that LA was such a closed thing. And I'll ask, and I have no idea, and I'm not presupposing, do you think part of the reason the door was shut so tightly was that you were female?
Amazingly, in the 70s, there were a lot more women as engineers and producers. When I was in the Bay Area, while I was an engineer and a producer, I was spying on the big studios, which was the Automat. The Automat was the big one. Also, Fantasy.
Yeah, and Music Annex and
right, Music Annex, right. So I would actually sit outside in my friend's van in the parking. He was the parking lot attendant. And I would sit outside of the Automat and watch the engineers going in and out of the studio. And one of them was Leslie Ann Jones.
Right.
And one of them was Maureen Droney.
Right.
And I was like, hey, if they can do this, I can do this. There's no reason why I can't do this. And they're working with, Jefferson Starship and Santana and doing all these big Bay Area bands, the major label things. So it seems like when I went to LA, though, things were starting to close in. There was less women wanting those jobs, I think. I'm not sure that it was because they were being discriminated against. Maybe there was a little bit of that, but I didn't experience that. I just knew that I had to start again because of my lack of experience, basically. And there was, however, one place that I went for an interview, and the manager at the time, it was well, I'm not going to say who the manager was, but the studio was A&M Studios. Right. And he said, yeah, women are a distraction. We don't hire women generally. And I was like, whoa. So I never actually I never worked at that studio just because I was kind of
good
incensed by that.
Yeah. Well, as you should. I guess
things turned out great. Things turned out.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. Everything happened the way it happened, and that's a good thing. So what year did you move down to LA? I just want to get my chronology together here.
Let's see. I moved down in 87.
Right.
Yeah, 87. And it was a rough time. I was working at Tower Records on and off because I was not a very responsible human being at that time. So I was basically sharing an apartment with several people and sleeping on the couch and partying a lot and making it to work sometimes. I did meet a lot of people at Tower that really brought me to where I wanted to be. But it took time, and it was like paying my dues there at Tower. It was a wonderful time at Tower Records, and that whole music scene at the time was really, really exciting. They had in-stores with, Elton John and David Lee Roth, and I met a lot of celebrities, and I worked at the customer service desk because I had some knowledge about music from working in radio, especially. I could talk about, charts and this and that. So I was the the customer service desk employee, and some of my coworkers were in a band called Green Jello, and they had just moved from Buffalo, New York, to LA, seeking fame and fortune, and they wound up working there like everybody else at the record store.
For people who don't know, basically Tower Records on Sunset was the east end of the Sunset Strip, and 87 is the absolute middle of the Sunset Strip hair metal extravaganza. I mean, that's why they're going after the guys working with Guns N' Roses, because that's like their gods at that point.
Actually, Axl and Slash both were working at the video store, the Tower Video, right across the street when I first landed at Tower on the record store side. So they just had bounced up to having a deal.
Right.
Jeff.
So it all happened at Tower. Well, all right. Yeah. So let's talk about Green Jello for a second, because first of all, they had one record that they must have put out while they were still up in Buffalo, which, first of all, it's hilarious. It's so ridiculously silly. And on Spotify, at least, someone has transferred it in from vinyl that crackles all the way through, and it's like not on purpose. But then you made a record with him.
I made 2 records with them. The record you're talking about, the crackly one, was probably the first one that we did in LA
Oh, really?
on an 8-track.
Are you
Yeah, on an
sure?
8-track.
All right, I've got my history wrong. It's so funny. It's such a
Yeah.
ridiculous record.
And here again was like the use of sound effects and humor and kind of a radio show kind of production. This was what I loved to do, and I knew how to use the equipment. And we set it up that we'd go into my friend's 8-track garage, and we recorded that first record. They put it out on vinyl, and then got a deal with Zoo, which was a label affiliated with BMG, I think, at the time. And so that was like a major label record all of a sudden.
Right.
Just completely a fluke, because we were not expecting to get any traction from this comedy record, comedy nursery rhymes sung with a metal singer,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
crazy.
But it's brilliant. But the second record, I mean, from a sonic standpoint, is kind of holy shit. Like, it sounds amazing.
Well, thank you.
So where did you make that record? Because that's...
Well, by then I had gotten a job in a real studio. So it was a couple years later, and I had managed to get into Larrabee Sound as an assistant. So I had access to the studios. They had a budget. So we recorded at Sound City, actually.
Right.
And then mixed it at Larrabee. And that one, my boss at Larrabee came running in. His name was Kevin Mills. And he came running in with the billboard one day, and he pointed at the singles chart. And he says, "You're number 24." And with this ridiculous song, Three Little Pigs. And I didn't really realize how good that was. It's hard to hit that at that time. It was very hard to hit that chart like that. And
I remember
so
Three Little
kind of
Pigs being on the
cascaded from
radio, heavy rotation back then.
Yeah, it was so silly.
Oh, it's great. But so we should talk a little bit, just to back up, like how you made the transition from Tower to Larrabee. Because obviously that's finally like, okay, now you're in an LA studio. So how'd that happen?
Yeah. I kept continuing to try to get jobs outside of Tower during that time. And I would bring in my, beautifully typed up and sometimes printed, which printing was not cheap at that time. But I would have my resume, and I'd walk in all dressed up nice, and really just kept on getting the, okay, thank you, and we'll call you if we need you, and never getting a call. So I thought I would just try something a little more dramatic. And then in the back of Tower was a machine that would make beautifully printed strips that we would tape to the bin cards. And so using that machine, it was kind of like a P-Touch thing, but it was the early version of that. I used that to make a sheet that was in the form of a newspaper, like the front of the Weekly World News. So I made a fake newspaper that said, Elvis has risen from the dead. And the headline was, only you can save engineer Sylvia Massy from the evil Elvis. And I had a picture of the evil Elvis, and then the story about how Sylvia Massy has been taken hostage by the evil Elvis. And, and I made it like Weekly World News, which at the time was had a headline about, a sighting of Elvis at a McDonald's in Detroit or something like that.
Right.
Eating a hamburger. Anyway, so I was playing off of that, and I did the same. I used my resume, except this time I stapled that thing on the front of the resume, the fake Weekly World News. And then I walked into the same studios that I always walked into. And suddenly I got callbacks. I got 4 job offers like in one day. And it went from me working at Tower Records on Friday to me working with Phil Ramone on a Barbara Streisand record at Lion's Share on Monday. It was that dramatic
Wow.
change. And then from there, then things quickly cascaded to getting a job at Larrabee. But I had a bit of an issue getting that job at Larrabee. Larrabee was the place I wanted to be because of the steady, the continuous high level of clientele going into Larrabee. And but when I went in there, they loved my resume, but they didn't have an engineering job for me. So Kevin Mills looked at me and he says, well, you know how to solder, right? We have a tech assistant job for you if you want it. And I was like thinking in my mind, how hard could it be? Of course I have soldering experience. So they said, okay, you're hired. And I went upstairs for my first day at Larrabee and sat down with the chief tech, Don Petty, who was this big, imposing man. I mean, very intimidating. And he handed me a box of crimp pins and an Elko connector and a tool. And he said, here you go. Go over on that bench and crimp this cable. And he gave me a multi-pin cable. And he says, go ahead and crimp it. And I didn't even know what I was looking at. I completely lied my way into this job. And I went over there and tried to make the tool work. You know, I didn't even know how to unhinge the tool so that it could start crimping. I figured if I could just get it to work, I would be able to do it, but I couldn't even get the tool to work. And after 20 minutes, I walked back over to Don and I said, Don, tell me exactly how you would like this done. And I set everything in front of him and he looked at me and he says, you've never done this before, have you? And I said, no. And he says, well, you're fired. So I got fired. And I went, you know, with my tail between my legs out the front door. But my boss, Kevin Mills, he thought I had such balls that the next day they called me back and they said, look, we don't have any engineering job for you, but you want to be a runner? Because we have a runner position for you. And so I did. I ran. I was a runner for 4 months, and then I got the next available position as an assistant.
Well, and now look at you crimping Elkos on the internet. You know,
penance. See, it's like there's a full circle happening here. When I do that crimping, it really is important to me to be able to know how to do this and how to share it with other people.
Yeah, I love that. It's an homage in a way.
Yeah. So that's my history with Elkos. I haven't really shared that with anyone.
Well, but let's back up to this Barbra Streisand session.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
Oh, my mind was blown. I, went from the record store to working with a superhero of mine. And the first thing he asked me to do is set up a DAT recorder, actually, so that they could run their mixes into it. And I did it correctly, and boom, thumbs up. So I felt pretty good about that. These little things that you start with that, as long as I wasn't fucking it up, I was okay. So
yeah.
I did pretty good. And that's what that was like. I didn't meet Barbara. They were just setting up for mixing at that point.
Right. Fair enough. So, all right, Larrabee.
Yeah, Larrabee was...
it was a hotbed.
Busy there.
Yeah.
It was busy. There was always things happening, and I connected with so many people there. It was a brilliant time. I connected with Prince, and with Rick Rubin, who turned out to be a Sea Hags fan. And here I'd done that record with Kirk Hammet, and he knew that I had been working with them, and he brought it up when I first was assisting a session with he and Dave Bianco. I think we were working on Trouble was the band, and yeah, I assisted a bunch of great sessions, and through that, I was able to step into a mixing role, and also brought my own little projects in, like the green jello. As soon as green jello hit, then things changed,
Right.
and I was able to uh, to grow from being an assistant to being a full-time producer engineer.
Well, before we come back to Green Jello, because we have to come back to that just for a second, but we should talk about Prince, because it wasn't like, oh yeah, I met Prince. Like you were his LA camp for a while, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There was a time when Prince was extremely prolific. He had sessions booked in both rooms at Larrabee West, as well as 2 rooms at the record plant in LA. Plus, he had Paisley Park, which was open and running. And what he would do is have Paisley ship tapes out from the archive, his archive from the old Revolution recordings. And he would have us make copies of these songs, the masters, the 24-track masters. And then he would have each room working on a set of masters. And in each room, we would replace the bass, replace all the vocals, but keep certain elements, keeping the percussions and the drum parts, or other melodic synth instruments and or guitar. And then he would create new songs. It was kind of like song recycling in a way, but he was doing this at a rate where each room, and there must have been 5 or 6 rooms going at any time. Each room he was producing from beginning to end 2 songs a day. So you think even at Larrabee, we were recording 4 songs a day, and include the record plant. There was another 6. So that's 6 songs a day. That's from inception, vocals, mixing, and done, 2 songs in each room. So I was in one of the rooms, and I would be waiting for him to show up, okay, to give me some parts. I would have the tracks the instruments all ready to go. So whatever he wanted to do, he would give me instructions. Okay, fly this into the verse here, and this is for the bridge. Create a bridge here, and that went on and off for about 3 years. But I nailed that gig, I think, because of the opportunity that Kevin Mills at Larrabee gave me. Prince had booked one room. He'd never been at Larrabee before, and Kevin said, "Look, this is the biggest thing that you're going to do. You have to make sure that he stays for more than 4 days, or make sure that he returns," because he had only booked 4 days. And so Prince walked into the room and looked around, and the first thing he said was, "Don't you have a big chair that I can sit in, like a grandma's chair, a stuffed chair?" And I have learned not to say no to anything. So even though I knew that we didn't have anything like that in the studio, so I just said, "Yeah, well, yes, we do have that." And I ran out and ran to an antique shop around the corner with one of the tech's trucks, and bought a chair, threw it in the back, brought it back, and set it. I think I was only gone about 20 minutes, luckily, and set it in the room. And he sat down. Prince sat down in that chair and kind of nodded his head. And then he wound up staying there pretty much for 3 years. So it worked. And I actually still have that chair. It was one that I bought.
That's always a thing. Chairs are always a thing.
Are they?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, I had someone working at my place, and he didn't like the chairs, so he showed up the next morning with 2 chairs, one for him, one for me. And I'm like, okay, now I got some chairs. So, yeah, because I think when we're setting stuff up, we don't care. As long as we don't fall over, we're like, fine, let's get to it. But yeah, chairs are a thing.
The chair is very important. You're right.
Yeah.
Material is very
Yeah.
important.
So this is the sort of era leading up to Diamonds and Pearls, right?
Yeah,
Basically,
right.
because I read in an interview with you about I'm looking for things. Hold on, about Get Off.
Oh
That track,
God,
Get
yeah,
Off. We don't have to tell the
right.
story if you don't want, but what's interesting to me is the way you explained. I mean, we can tell that story if you want.
Yeah, I'd like
Okay,
to.
you tell that because then I got something else I want to ask you about it.
Okay. So while I was working with Prince for that time, and he had booked both rooms, and sometimes I would do assisting in one room for one of the other engineers. And the engineer, Keith Cohen, was mixing this track, this new track, Get Off. The funny thing was that the, Prince is so prolific that he had finished this album, Diamonds and Pearls. It was mastered, and we were all so happy and proud of it. And then he would continually be writing and love the latest thing that he did. So he did this song Get Off, and I just hated it. I admit that I just didn't like this song. I thought it was kind of stupid, and Get Off, you know. So I thought that there was much better material on the album, but he insisted on pulling off one of my favorite songs and putting on this Get Off song on the album that was already finished and mastered. So Keith was in there doing a mix of Get Off, and I was sitting in the back of the room as the assistant, and I was just waiting for Keith to give me any instruction or tell me what to do. And during that time, I have to be, paying attention, but I would bring my journal in and just kind of doodle or write, what my thoughts were. So this session, I wrote my thoughts into the book, which was something like, there's Prince sitting on his purple throne, and he's taking a perfectly good album and he's ruining it with this horrible song, Get Off. And I don't like this song. And and I just started, I was just, because it really is cathartic to be able to write and get that stuff from burning a hole in your head. So Keith said, hey, can you patch this thing in? And I put the book down and went over to the patch bay on the other side of the room and started patching. And I hear Prince's voice reading aloud, there's Prince sitting on his purple throne. And I was just like, no. And I, turned around. I saw him reading my book, and I grabbed it. I ran and grabbed it out of his hand, and I was shaking. I knew I was fired. I knew I was fired. But he was laughing, and he thought it was so funny that it was actually. We got along a lot better after that. It was a funny thing because, he was surrounded with yes people.
Yeah.
And barely had anyone give their true opinion about things. That doesn't mean that the album was changed in any way. He went ahead and put Get Off on the album.
Which,
in fact, it was
that
a
worked
huge
out.
hit.
It worked out.
So yeah. So what do I know?
So once again, your balls,
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about that, because that album, obviously he spent a huge amount of time working on it because it got to the point where it was done, then it wasn't done, and moved more songs because the label didn't want to put it out because he hadn't toured the previous record yet. And there are a lot of things that sort of delayed it. But from what I remember with Get Off is he actually did the track, sent it out, and had tons of remixes done, got all those remixes back and thought, that's cool, and actually grabbed elements from remixes and put them on the record.
Yeah, that would make sense because everyone had. It was a big business then, is doing remixes.
Yeah. But normally there's no chance for an artist to incorporate anything because the single's out and then they had remixes done and then those would go out. But to be able to call it, because I might be making this up because it's such a huge part of the track, I can't quite believe it. But I think that flute riff was off one of the remixes.
I wouldn't doubt it.
If anyone has not heard that track, go listen to it because it is a funky jam. That
it
thing.
Is. I listened to that Prince stuff. It's brilliant, And can you understand that sound? The sound of his. There is a Prince sound, right? It's it's kind of aggressive funk.
Yeah.
It's kind of bristly and grainy. And it's because he was over recording everything, just slamming the needles on those tape machines all the time. I would be putting up a tape, one of these tapes from the vault, and everything was just, if you turn down the volumes, all you could hear is the rattling of the needles hitting the pins in those meters on the tape machines. Everything was over recorded.
It's a real thing, though. I mean, because Jimmy Douglas said the same thing. Like, that was part of their sound with Timberland, was just smashing tape. And, just like that's the kick drum. It's just modulation distortion. So, but it's such a great place to learn stuff, too, because it's not like, oh, hold on, let me get a sound on that. It's like, let's go. Let's go.
And that's the reason why, because it's more important. Actually, the quality of the recording is less important than the performance itself. And that was a lesson to be learned. You always had to be ready for anything and have tape rolling at all times.
So, all right, we got to go back to Green Jello just for a second. Because first of all, everybody has to listen to Three Little Pigs. And if you were alive when that song came out, you will recognize it. I had no idea that the band was called Green Jello. That part of my brain had gone completely. But from the first second of that song, like, oh, right, it's that one. And it's amazing. But the point is, because there's a certain somebody who was playing drums in that band who was also playing drums in another band.
Right.
So
and
I would... Can I show the peeps a picture at this point? Sure. Okay, so we're not going to see it, but you guys are going to see this picture. Now... you know the picture well enough to know that we're looking at Maynard up front in the mohawk, jeans, right. No shirt. We're looking at Tom Morello in a crunch jacket, and we're looking at a certain someone standing next to him drinking a Bud.
Yeah.
And who would that be?
Yeah. That was the band Tool when they were playing at Raji's. They would play in all these little clubs in Hollywood. They were kind of a thing. It wasn't, they weren't like a phenomenon, like there was a lot of people at their shows, but everyone would support each other. So like Tom, he had a band at the time. And I was working, and I think that was actually before I made the jump to Larrabee.
Well, supposedly, according to the internet, it was 91. Early 91.
Okay, so I had just made my jump to.
Well, and the only reason I was worried about, not worried, but I was trying to figure out what the date was. I'm just going to put the picture up again. It's because Tom's wearing a red hat, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but you're wearing a really nice red sweater because apparently it was Valentine's Day. So it was Valentine's Day 91, from what I can find out. So
right.
So or did you just wear red sweaters all the time?
I can't remember that actually, but yeah, I was still partying a lot then. I quit drinking and any other recreational drugs soon after that. Actually, when I realized that I was fucking up my future, I had this great opportunity in front of me, and I didn't want to fuck it up, so I quit everything. So no more like partying at the clubs for me, but I would go out and support the bands.
Right.
And it was around 91 that we got ready to record Tool. They were also signed by Zoo, and Danny Carey, the drummer from Tool, had played on the Green Jello record. Actually, his drums were set up at Sound City, and we thought, well, we're going to do this Tool record. Why don't we just, since the drums are set up, once we finish Green Jello, let's just record this EP with Tool. So it was because of convenience sake that we did it in that big, beautiful drum room at Sound City. And the Green Jello, also that Three Little Pigs song, it was Maynard who sang the part, "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin." So there was a real connection with Tool there. Maynard was actually living at the Green Jello loft during those recordings. And yeah, that, you know, the seriousness of the Tool band, though, they were unbelievable live. And so when I had an opportunity to record them, it was the biggest job was to capture what they do live. You know, being a producer, you take different roles depending on what the artist needs, the client needs. You know, you'll step into that role. For Tool, to be honest, I was just documenting exactly what they did, and then doing a little embellishment with overdubs. But honestly, it was pretty much all there. You know, when you record a great band, it's the challenge is to capture them, what they do live.
And so what did you do specifically to make that happen? Did it sort of happen because it worked out that it happened, or was it kind of a rough start to get that to happen? Or
Well, there were some specific things that I did to record Tool, which I hadn't done before, which was to, for one thing, the guitar, I used a splitter box, and the splitter went to 2 heads and 2 caps. So one of the heads was a Marshall lead, a super lead. I think it was a 50-watt Marshall. The other one was a dual rectifier Mesa head, which was relatively new at the time. So the Mesa head had this real compressed sound and buzzy kind of distortion, whereas the Marshall was open and dynamic. Then when recording, I would record that guitar into 2 tracks. So the Marshall on one track and the Mesa on another track, but it was the same performance. Suddenly, with one performance, you get this big, wide picture, and the movement, because they react differently. You get this panning movement, which made it possible to kind of fill in the empty space in the project.
Right, to not to immediately have to double things, and
it makes the guitar sound so much bigger. There was other things that I did with the drums that was different too. I was miking the top and the bottom toms, which I had tried previously and really had figured out how to do it well. And you put a mic on the top and the bottom of each tom, and you flip the phase on the bottom mic. And I was using, Sennheiser 421s on both the top and bottom of these toms. And that gave the toms a really full sound, because you start with the top mic and you get the crack, and then you bring up the level on the bottom mic until it just fills in that tone. So there was that. There was also MS miking on the overheads, which I just discovered MS, and I still don't quite understand how it works. But MS miking is where you use 2 microphones. One mic is in a cardioid pattern, and the other mic is in a figure 8. Basically, here's your cardioid, and you're picking up this area here, and the figure 8 is picking up this area here. And then if you take the figure 8 signal and mult it, typically the best way to do that is in the patch bay, is to use a mult in the patch bay to split it into 2 signals, bring that figure 8 onto 2 tracks, up on 2 tracks, and flip one of those sides out of phase, and then bring your cardioid mic up between that. And when you bring the cardioid into the picture, the sound just goes out. It's the widest, most beautiful picture sonically, and it's directional. And this is the thing that I'm not quite how it works. Maybe you know how this works, right?
A bit. Well,
but it works beautifully.
Ask the question. Yeah, I mean, it basically, because you've taken this one microphone and it's completely out of phase. So if you collapse it to mono, it disappears because it's a it's a single mic,
Right,
but it's
right.
only picking up the sides, which means there's no direct sound in it whatsoever. So really, you've got this main microphone, like, okay, here you go. And then you've got the widest room reverb possible.
Yeah,
Because the
yeah.
other great thing about the figure eight is it doesn't pick up anything from the front. It's the best rejection you'll ever get
Right,
because the
right.
front is its sides. So, yeah, it's just like you get mono and you get totally crazy, phasey side stuff. And when it's done
Yeah.
right, it's incredible.
Well, when it's done right, you will know where your hat is in the picture and your ride is in the picture. And that's how I recorded the overheads on this drum kit during the Tool record, doing those Tool records, which just made this humongously wide picture with these, and then the miking on the toms are huge. And Danny's such an amazing player. And the harder he hit the drum, the better it would sound. And so, yeah, that was a challenge and a joy working with Danny on those drums.
And did you have to do anything performance-wise for them to get the same energy as they got live, or were they just bringing it all the time, no matter what?
Well, in speaking about that, that was where I would try to always bring people into the same room. When they're performing together while we're recording, I don't want them in separate rooms. I want to have them in the same room. So drummer and bass player and guitar player all in the same room. And that's how we recorded at Sound City. And then we also recorded at Grandmaster Recorders, which was a funky little room in Hollywood.
Yeah, right by the Taco Bell.
Yeah, and there we did scratch vocals. Yeah, you know exactly where it is. We did scratch vocals with Maynard. He was in a separate room, but for the most part, yeah, that's how you capture everyone's live feeling. You're wearing headphones, but you get visual cues when you're playing in the same room, and there's a kind of a magic that happens with that. Now, if you really want to get even closer to live, then you'll take the headphones off and you'll put some wedges on the floor and just have the bleed
Right.
for everyone to. So that's very live. But for the Tool stuff, we did use headphones. There was another thing that I did on the Tool records, which gave it a live feeling, and this is hugely important. On the first recordings I did with Tool, the vocal mic, I was trying to use the high quality Neumann. There was a U67. So I would set that up for Maynard. And first it was like this, with a tall stand and a suspended microphone, and he would sing into it properly with the pop filter and everything. Not getting the right performance with that. So I thought, on stage when you see him play live, and I think even that old photo shows him, he's leaning over like this. He's like, rah. So then I tried moving that 57 or the 67 so that it was like close to the ground, and so he could kind of spit into it, while he's singing. And that was okay, but it still wasn't the real thing. It wasn't until, and he made the suggestion. He brought in a mic. It was a AKG C1000, which is not an expensive mic. It's a condenser that runs with a 9-volt battery, and it's I still have the mic, but it's we wrapped the end of it with foam, and so that he could spit on it and whatever, and it wouldn't get the so much noise from the knocking it around, and he sang like he was on stage, so he was really doing his thing like the troll, rah, and that's how you get a great performance for a great live singer. Is give him a handheld mic. That was a big lesson that I learned from the Tool records.
Yeah, I remember doing the same thing. You get into the studio and you think, "Ooh, now we have to use this and whatever," and it turns out that a 58 or an SM7 or it's not always the expensive stuff.
Right.
Especially for that, it's interesting because it is hard trying to capture that, because I know Garth did a great presentation about the first Rage record at NAMM this year, and talking about, and with those guys, I mean, they set up live. They were in the, like, he from the very beginning, he set up a PA in the room and everything. But even that wasn't enough, and they had to get friends in, and they just had 20 people sitting in the live room while they recorded,
Right.
because it's like
Yeah.
it just wasn't happening. And it's not because those guys didn't happen. I've seen a video, and it's probably from not too long after that picture, of Rage playing like a lunchtime concert at Cal State Northridge or something like that.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
is on fire. So I'm sure, like those Tool shows, you know, the bands live were just absolutely incredible. But it's another thing as a producer, young bands, like, there's nothing more intimidating than being in a studio. Like, that's crazy. It's the first time they've ever actually heard anyone else in the band play. And they're under a microscope. And so, yeah, anything you can do to make them comfortable. And those Tool records sound like it. But they're also, I mean, they're obviously meticulous. You know, every detail of every song is worked out. There's nothing like, let's just see what happens, you know, 12-bar blues. And like, no, it's
Right.
very
Right.
detail oriented.
But incredibly, on Undertow, part of those, some of those songs were written in the studio. There was no material. Their material was not finished.
Wow.
So, yeah. So they did a great job writing this record. I mean, these records they're so important, I think.
Now, also, famously, at the end of Undertow, there's quite a bit of noise that sounds like the insides of a piano, because it is the insides of a piano. You want to talk a little bit about what you did on that track? And then, was this the first time you were basically just destroying things on a record?
I think that during the recording of Undertow, we were discussing how to make the world's most obnoxious sound. And I threw out some ideas of getting an old piano, getting a piano and lifting it up to the top of a building with a crane, and then dropping it and recording that. And that should be a really obnoxious sound. So I went about trying to find a crane company that would do it for us. I knew where to get the pianos. These pianos, they're relics that can't be repaired. They're totaled, basically. So many of these old pianos can't be repaired. So you can get them for, you know, just $50 or such. So, but I couldn't get a crane company to actually do this lifting and dropping. So I bought two pianos. We pushed them into the dock at the back of Grandmaster's studio, and we just set out to make the most obnoxious noise ever. And whatever would happen with it, we were going to use it or not use it. I don't know. We didn't know what it would be like. I wanted them to be performing while they were smashing it. I provided everybody with sledgehammers, pickaxes, and you know, there was something else. Everyone had safety glasses, of course.
Good,
You
of
have
course,
to be
safety
safe,
first.
and gloves, and yeah, it was exciting. And then Danny brought his sawed-off shotgun, so shooting holes into the piano. There were two pianos, and yeah, they were destroyed. But we spent a whole afternoon having fun doing that, and there is some footage out there of that whole day. It was super fun. And then amazingly, we were able to sequence that into what is disgustipated on the end of the record. And Maynard performed a speaking part over it, and the sequencing was done. We took all the sounds, and I did little samples of different sounds and sent them over to my friend Eric Anist. His name is his stage name is Static, and he put together this performance piece that was on the end of the Undertow record. I think it came out great. It's super weird, though. I mean, it's like, you know, it's weird.
Yeah.
That whole record, it has kind of a weird vibe.
Well, it's Tool, you know.
It's cool. Yeah.
So was that the first time you did something like that on a recording, or had you kind of always wanted to be doing things like that?
I guess that was the first time. I mean, I hadn't done that many professional recordings in LA. It was just um, Green Jello and maybe a few other things. But Green Jello was heavy on the sound effects. So I'm into that, whether we're using sound effect records or we're creating our own sound effects. I'm really into incorporating those types of things into the music. So that was my chance of actually doing a live recording of something, you know, crashing. I think we had been talking about maybe crashing a car or something like that, which would have also been a good thing to do, which I did later. But
Well, we haven't gotten to that one yet. But it's right back to your, 9-year-old radio shows in Flint, basically.
exactly, and especially anything with a sense of humor, I love. So the funny thing about the Tool music is, you know, it doesn't seem like it's funny. There's doesn't seem like it has a sense of humor, but honestly, if you met those guys, if you met Maynard, he was a hoot. He was doing stand-up comedy at clubs in LA at the time that we were recording that record. And the lyrics of the Tool records are very surprising if you actually know what they mean. And then the artwork on the albums too. If there's a lot of hidden meanings, and on the spine of the CD, you'll see little pictures of like, oh, whoa, what's that? You know, a lot of mysterious imagery that they packed into those records.
Of course, he did also have a sawed-off shotgun that he could just bring to the
Right.
studios. So there's that, you know. So you're still working at Larrabee at that point. My timeline's a little messed up there because that's pretty early on, but then you're still at Larrabee for a few years, right?
Yeah, there was a time when I was still working for Prince, and um, I think that I was just getting into producing the Tool album and was offered the job to produce the Tool album, the Undertow. But I had sessions with Prince, and then the Prince crew, the manager called me and said, "Hey, we have a job for you at Paisley Park, and we'll move you to Minneapolis." Um, but I had just gotten this gig with Tool, so I turned him down. I turned down Prince for Tool. Um, so that was my leaving of Larrabee. And Prince never
Right.
called me back after that either. I mean, you don't turn down Prince. So that was when I made the leap into being an independent.
Right.
Was at around that time, the Tool record.
Right. But you'd done some engineering for Rick at that point at Larrabee,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah,
I mean, I suppose we could talk about Rick for a minute because,
yeah.
Rick Rubin.
Yeah, there was several things that I was doing for Rick and George Fikulias, who was a partner at Deaf American at the time too.
Yeah.
George is also a producer who did the Black Crows. So I did sequencing of the albums, the masters. I was basically doing post-production, master editing, and crossfades and stuff like that for Rick and for George. And Rick and we connected on the CHAGs. It was a big surprise that we had that in common because I think he really wanted to work with them. It never happened, but that was a part of our connection. As well, he brought in an album by a group called the Ghetto Boys, and it was a really hardcore rap album where the lyrics are about killing grandma and fucking her corpse, and oh my god, it was just like the most harsh material you could imagine. At a time when most rap was still about Adidas and nice things. So, but Rick was so proud of that. He was so proud of this gnarly Ghetto Boys record. And so I really enjoyed doing work with Rick. And it was after the Tool record that we connected again at Sound City, because he loved that old Neve in the A room at
Yeah.
Sound City. And I also fell in love with that Neve sound. And I wasn't even sure what it was. I think my first experience with the vintage Neve console was at a studio called Paramount Recording in LA on Santa Monica. And I was working with a band called the Junkyard. It was a metal, spandex metal band.
Yeah, yeah.
With Neil Vukovic from Geffen. And there was something about that Neve, the sound that was so easy to use, so Sound City had the same console. And again, Grandmaster, where we did a bunch of Tool songs, also had that console, that type of console. So it was kind of a natural thing for us to meet together, Rick and I, on recording in Sound City, because we love the same equipment, I think. He's not an engineer, though. He's not a technician, and he's not really a musician of sort, but he just knows what works, and he kind of puts everything in a petri dish. Here's this engineer, and here's this equipment, and here's this drummer, and okay, now you guys go. He's brilliant for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you end up, because you ended up engineering for him as well, but so obviously one of the Johnny Cash records, but System of a Down was kind of a thing. I mean, because that sort of started you guys working together in a way, like more than just doing some editing or a bit of this and a bit of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was, we had worked together at Larrabee, and then I would see him at shows every once in a while. I would go down to the Whiskey and see a show of a potential client, or just to keep up with the music at the time, which was around 91, 92. And I'd see him at these shows, and we'd talk. And my manager, Frank McDonough, at the time, suggested that I go see this band, System of a Down, because they were blowing up, right? Their shows were huge in LA.
Yeah.
And so I went down to see System of a Down. They were supposed to be on at 10 o'clock or something like that. And it was at the Whiskey. And I saw the band. It was kind of an empty room. And there was a band on stage with hair, the singer with hair in front of his face. And he was raw. It was like Cookie Monster rock kind of thing. I was like, man, what's the big deal with this band? I didn't really like them that much, but okay, I get it. And I walked out after that show, and I saw Rick standing out on the street, and he's like, oh my God, System of a Down, don't you just love them? And I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess. Yeah. And I left. Apparently, I had seen the wrong band, because Frank gave me a cassette of the band, their original demos on a cassette. And he says, listen to this. And it was something that Jay Baumgartner had recorded over at NRG.
Wow.
And I listened to these songs, and I was like, oh my God, I did not hear this band. This is not the band that I saw at the Whiskey. I loved the demos, because it's everything that I love about music. It's a sense of humor, and not taking themselves so seriously, but then also really seriously on their politics and the aggressiveness of those guitar tones and everything. It was a very exciting band, very complex band with this Middle Eastern kind of flavor that was genuine. And so I was like, Frank, I got to work with this band. Oh my God. So he set me up to go meet with them at a meal with I think they were on Universal. What are they on? No, they
Well,
were being wooed by
yeah,
different labels
Rick
at the
was.
time. They
Yeah,
weren't
they
even
hadn't
signed,
signed yet.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And so I met with them with some other label execs, and we had a meal together. And the drummer, oh my God, he's such a sweetheart. He says, "How do you like the show?" I was like, "Yeah, I love the show. I really love your drum parts." I was just like, "Fuck, what am I gonna say?" I was just like, "Oh, totally lied my way through." I'm such a liar. Anyway, so I faked my way through that meal, but um, eventually Rick got the gig. I mean, he signed them,
yeah, yeah.
and of course, how are you going to argue with him producing the record? So I called up Rick, and I was just like, "Rick, I wanted to produce this band. You're going to produce them. Let me engineer this one for you. You know, I'll take a cut and pay." And
The
he
magic
went for it.
words.
Yeah, right.
Oh,
I still got paid well, but not as much as other projects. And I got to record this fantastic record. And I really, because of the way Rick works, I had a lot of input on how it was recorded and the overdubs and the way that things shaped up. But Rick is he hits with pinpoint accuracy. He walks in the room after maybe he hasn't been there for a day or two, and he listens to what you're working on, and he just nails it. He says, "You need to do this. You need to start over with this, and write a new part for this." And bam. So I really loved working on that record. The System of a Down record is one of my favorites.
yeah. It's great. It's a great, great record, and definitely fits in your wheelhouse. So,
And who would have known that Sugar would be a hit song? I mean, it's so weird, but it
yeah,
really is truly, like you say, it's in my wheelhouse because it's so weird. I
yeah,
love I love music that has a sense of humor that's really breaking new ground. Whether and I'll work on something whether or not it's obvious to be successful, because it's more important about the music than it is about their chance of success. I guess I'll
yeah.
try to help them as much as I can with them achieving success, but that's not necessarily the point.
But it's not just about it being heavy, because otherwise you would have wanted to produce the Cookie Monster band too. It's like heavy with a purpose to
Yeah,
offset, to give the setting for the humor that doesn't make you just laugh it off. Like, it's still really important because you
yeah,
cannot get away from how heavy that stuff is.
yeah, and how real it is because of their Armenian heritage and actually their own history individually of leaving and not actually growing up in Armenia, because there was no Armenia, and all their grandparents had been massacred, and in a genocide that the United States really hasn't uh, acknowledged. It's a difficult thing to learn that about these people, and they're very sensitive and rightly so for this heritage that they have.
Yeah. So that started you doing some other stuff with Rick, but I have to go back to Prince just for 1 second,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because on your website there's a Prince track with Kate Bush.
Ooh. Yeah. Right.
What's the story with that? Because Kate Bush, that's the poster I had on the wall in college.
Mm.
What's the deal with that?
Well, the um, during the time I was working with Prince, he was really, the factory was running full steam. So he would take songs from the Revolution archives and revamp them into new songs. So there was a lot of that going on, and he would ship those out to different performers that want a Prince song for their album. So Paula Abdul got one. Another one went to a band, Louie Louie. And Prince was also reviving the careers of his idols. So Rosie Gaines had a Prince track, and George Clinton had a Prince track.
Right.
And then there was this collaboration with Kate Bush. And in fact, this is a Kate Bush song that came out later, but this version was early. It was a rough mix that went to a cassette, and it was not thought about so heavily that it really, really changed later, and it got very busy. But this particular rough mix was just something that I loved, and that's how I have it. It was a rough mix that was made kind of while he was in the room. There was some things being played, and the tapes were always running.
Right.
And he was playing some parts live, and it was just being recorded. So the quality of that recording is not good because it was on a kind of a crappy cassette that was being reused. But I'm lucky to have that.
It sounds great to me. Well, anything with Kate Bush sounds great to me.
It's
but
really special.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really special.
It's really,
track.
really cool.
And you can hear Prince singing the backing parts and playing guitar. But it's a Kate Bush track from one of her records.
Right. Okay. Sorry. I can't skip Kate Bush because that's insane. So moving on with Rick for a little bit, we should talk about Mr. Johnny Cash.
Yeah. What an incredible year that was. I mean, it took about a year to finish that record. The record was Unchained, and it was Johnny Cash's second to the last record.
Was this? Yeah, it was the second of the American series.
Second, right?
American,
yes. Second to the last record before he passed. He was a gentle old fellow. You just wanted to give him a hug. He was so kind. Big, tall guy. Always wore black. His guitar was black. And he would fret it. It's just, he would apologize. He's like, yeah, I don't play guitar very well. I don't sing very well. And I'm just like, oh, you can't tell the guy, anything. It's just, everything's okay, And what a wonderful set of sessions that was. It was, a majority was recorded at Sound City in the big A room with the
Heartbreakers, right?
Right. It was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and several different session drummers. But yeah, Tom Petty and Mike Campbell and Ben Montench.
Yeah.
And, Howie. Wow. What a great lineup. And then there were other guest artists that would come in too. There was Mick Fleetwood and Lindsey Buckingham came in to record some. And that was at Ocean Way. That was when it was Ocean Way. Now it's East West.
Right.
In Studio 2, we did some sessions there.
Another fantastic old Neve.
Oh, yes. Right. And Carl Perkins came in to do some parts. June Carter Cash came in and sang a duet with Johnny. And then I flew to Nashville to work with Johnny on vocals at the Cowboy Arms Hotel and Recording Spa. That was a great experience. I recorded it all to analog. We were still using analog tape, but I wanted to have a vintage sound. So I was using old compressors. I was using old broadcast stay level compressors, mostly the Gates stay level, and the old Neve and old German mics. It has a vibe.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, all those records do, and they all have their own vibe. Because I worked on American 4 and some of the stuff that then hung around for 5, but they're all really different. Which, considering basically the conceit is the same on all of them, it's take other people's songs, put those words in Johnny's mouth to make them sound like much better songs, and then he'll do a few of his own. But they're all really, really different records in their own way. Yeah.
Yeah. And Rick is a freaking genius for that too, because I say that Rick is a fan, right? He's a fan. Number one, he will choose the material. He'll choose the songs. He'll record way more songs and consider way more songs than are needed for any particular project for many reasons. One thing is, like, if you have, let's say, on the Chili Peppers material, those albums that he did with the Chili Peppers, I think that they would collect 100 to 200 songs before they would choose the final 25
Yeah,
to
I
record.
mean, we had 50 with lead vocals for "I'm With You."
Right. And see what you get there. You
Yeah,
get a best distillation of a multitude of songs for one release, and then all these extra tracks to bring back later. I mean, this just makes, if you're able to do it, wow. So you're just going to get winning records time after time. And he did the same thing with Johnny, where he brought in songs by Beck and by Soundgarden. It's very unusual material that was considered for this album. I think they had a Robert Palmer song, "Addicted to Love." I don't think it ever came out. Right? There's some great outtakes to that album too. I think I have one with Rick actually singing the lead just to show Johnny what was going on.
well, I know that because there were a couple sessions where like Johnny would have to go, and so Rick would just have a mic and he'd be laying on the couch putting down a guide
Yeah.
vocal so the band could play. Yeah,
Right.
just
Brilliant.
why not? And one of the sort of, it's almost heartbreaking every time I even think about it, is that Rick said he'd spent so many years just making lists of songs that for years after Johnny died, he would still just make lists of songs for him. Because that was such a part of Rick's life.
It's a beautiful thing that Rick spends time and effort and money to revive someone's career who's really worthy of it. But how do you reintroduce a classic artist to a new, younger audience? That's the trick. And he was able to do that with several artists.
Yeah. And always by stripping them down to their essence, not by dressing them up in the new stuff, which is a different way of doing it. It's like, let's make something like the first 2 Sabbath records or the first 3 Metallica records, or, which you could go any way with that. But that's the thing, is like, why did people love you in the first place? And let's do some more of that.
Right.
So,
and Johnny's interpretations of these songs are so genuine and real. He has been one of the most the greatest American storytellers of all, I think.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah, absolutely. And his ability to tell other people's stories is unparalleled. I've never heard covers that were that much better for the lyrics. Not necessarily for the songs themselves, but just to make the lyrics mean so much.
Yeah, right. And that's a big trick to get a client that you're working with, an artist, to make a song that they didn't write, their own song. You have to really immerse yourselves into the lyric to know to express this, to tell the story, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So you brought up the Chili Peppers. So let's talk a little bit about Beavis and Butthead and Love Roller Coaster, because that is such an awesome version of that song.
There's another fun one that we did in Studio 2 at Ocean Way / East West, and we recorded the basic tracks at Sound City again, our old favorite haunts. But yeah, working with Flea, I know I understand the dynamics of this band. Flea's the businessman. He's the guy that makes it all happen, And but what a great sense of humor they have. We did the lead parts with kazoos, and
yeah, it's a brilliant thing to do all the horn parts on kazoo. That's awesome.
Yeah, so we had fun with that. Yeah,
that's great. And that you're listed as producer on that. And
yeah, that was Love Roller Coaster. Yeah, that was the track I did with them as a producer.
It's an interesting thing, because I don't know if it exists as much, but that was always like an opportunity when a band was going to do something, one song for a soundtrack. All of a sudden the label would sort of back off, and like if it was a band that Rick had been working with, he'd back off, like, well, I'll executive produce this one, and kind of let people run with stuff. There were always really good opportunities to be had on stuff like that.
Right, those one-off
track. Yeah, where
Yeah.
there's not as much pressure on it. But then, I mean, maybe it wasn't big, but I know I loved it when it came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really,
Yeah.
for the Dave Navarro
Right.
version of that band, it's kind of my favorite track they ever did. I don't
Right.
dislike One Hot Minute completely, but it's like, it was a little weird. I never quite came to terms with it, as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, that track is awesome. It's just so
Yeah.
much
You've done a
fun.
lot of work with the Chili Peppers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very fortunate. Very
Yeah.
fortunate. Great people to be in the studio with. And what
Yeah.
amazing players too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just insane. Really,
Yeah.
really cool. So all right. There's so much more to talk about. But I don't want to just like go, record by record, because there are a ton. I mean, the fact that you assisted on a Ryuichi Sakamoto record and a Fishbone record, like there are stories from those. I mean, just Fishbone, those guys, they were everywhere. They
Oh
were
man.
just such a part of the
They
LA
were very
scene.
volatile at this time. I don't think they were getting along with with their producer, David Kahn. I think that there was an incident at Larrabee when I was assisting them,
I
where I
think,
think they tried someone fish choked David, and then they were, then they got anyway, it was
yeah,
chaos. Yeah,
there's stuff. I mean, and like Walter would be working security places, but then
yeah.
like sometimes people would be working security to keep him out of places, and but what a
But
great,
wow,
great
what a
band.
great band! And holy cow, those live shows were some of the most uh, uh, astounding shows I'd ever seen.
Yeah,
And yeah, but they had issues, I'm still friends with Norwood.
right.
He's been up here before producing a project, and yeah, but yeah,
Because they did a little comeback thing last year, the year before. Weren't they doing
yeah,
something? I don't. I remember hearing about it, but I don't think I heard anything. So I don't even know if it happened. That's how out of touch I am. But yeah,
yeah.
that's worth a little YouTube troll and find some old footage of those guys, because it's incredible. So you sort of, I mean, obviously, you all of us end up working on a variety of projects, but you kind of made your mark on this heavy, artistic, with a sense of humor thing. Like this was a thing. This was kind of what you did. And the records, first of all, just sound absolutely fucking huge. So let's start with that. And that rolls into a bunch of other bands, but it starts, the genre seems to move a little bit. Like there's Simon, that Norwegian band that we actually ended up crossing paths on later. He made a few records with them. There's Skunk and Nancy, Powerman 5000. They're I mean, Cog much more recently.
Yeah.
But right in the middle of all of this, you worked with two very special girls that I got to ask you about, Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen.
You know what? I think that's a mistake.
Is it? I was thinking like there had to be
I
like
think that,
one
yeah,
song where like Serge did some background vocals and you had a credit, or like something really
yeah,
weird.
if actually it was a song that I worked on, it wasn't with them, but it wound up being their song later. I know, I've heard that before. I've seen it on a couple lists, and I'm like, what was that? After a while, after 35 years of doing this, there's some things that you forget.
Yeah,
But
I think you'd remember that one. That would have been
yeah,
a
I think I
little out
would
of the
too.
wheelhouse,
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I want to move into, I mean, obviously we could just go record by record, and the discography, I haven't mentioned Dishwalla. There's some really, really amazingly cool stuff along the way. But I think we're sort of almost coming up to when you decided to leave LA. So
Right.
I'd love to hear a little bit about what was going on in your career at that point, and did part of the decision come from you feeling like you were established enough, or did you just want to get away from LA, or like, because it's a really tough thing. I mean, I've moved out of LA too, but I did it when you could be much more portable, and my career changed a lot less than yours would have to when you moved out, because you were kind of on fire in a way. So I'd love to talk a bit about that. And obviously, if there are any projects or any instruments you destroyed along the way you want to talk about first, we can do that. But
Well, the story of me leaving LA was a very human story. in that I wanted to have a family. And it was, this is kind of the story of women in these types of jobs where it really requires your full attention and absolute dedication and no days off and very little social time. It was, you know, I met a guy and it was a long distance relationship and we wrote back and forth. This is before email. We didn't, well, there was email, but we decided to write actual notes back and forth, long distance. He lived in Northern California and was a railroader. He was outside of the business. I thought, well, here's someone, and we're both sober. And it's also an issue when you are, you know, dedicated to not fuck up with your drinking and whatever, that you spend time with someone who's of like mind. Very difficult to find these types of people in LA.
Yeah.
Especially to have a relationship with. So I made a huge decision. I was at the peak of my work. Actually, I had work lined up and things were really happening. But I made that big decision to move up to Northern California and go have a family. And I took a year off. At first, it wasn't off. I actually commuted back and forth doing several projects during that time.
Which is, I think, when we met. And because it was also when you mixed the Zero Mancer record, which was the Simon thing. So you came down to Sausalito from Weed at that point. Or not even Weed. I don't think you were up in Weed yet, exactly.
Right. But I was in Mount Shasta, which is a neighboring town. And my husband, Greg, and I got along brilliantly, but I was of the age where it was iffy if I was going to get pregnant. And I didn't get pregnant. So this is the saddest part about it being a woman in the industry, is that you reach an age when you're at your peak career and you could, you know, you're hitting the stratosphere, and then you have to make this horrible decision. Do I want to have babies? You know, which completely changes the landscape of everything. Or do I want to just, you know, not have children? So I took that chance. I went up there and there were no babies. So after a year of not working, I started looking around for a way to set up a studio up there and still stay and still stay in my marriage and create a life up there that would include working and creating music. I still owned my console, which I bought in the I bought it in 94, actually. It's a Neve 8038. And it was living in the B room at Sound City during this whole time. So I found a place, we found a theater in this town called Weed, a beautiful acoustic space. And it was basically abandoned. And so I arranged to have the console shipped up there, and we started a studio called Radio Star. And that ran for 15 years. I can't even believe it. It was crazy busy how it blew up. But yeah, so that's the true human story of why I left LA. And I've had some opportunities to move back, and now I'm just kind of happy with where I'm at. I'm not with Greg Shivy anymore. That marriage didn't work out. And he has kids now with someone else. But,
right.
But yeah, I'm extremely happy and thankful that things have turned out this way. I have to say that, you know, I love kids, but babies kill music. That's my theme these days.
Is that what you have written on your baby? Is
yes,
this baby
I think
kills
I have a
music.
bumper sticker that says that.
This baby kills music. Yeah.
Well, you know, as much as I love them, time and time again, we all have friends who have stopped playing music because they have to get serious with their family. And for women, it's extremely difficult to have a family and continue their career doing this work.
Right. So, well, Radio Star, we could talk about that for a bit. Because, I mean,
Yeah.
like you say, it was 15 years. It was crazy busy. It was 5 rooms by the time you
Yeah,
shut
it
it down.
started out with one room. We brought in the console and put it together, and within 4 days we were doing our first project. It was still on tape at that time, 24 track. And the theater it's an old vaudeville theater, and I still own the building, but the studio's not in it anymore. But there's a big stage down in front, and it seated about 500 people. Had a big balcony. So the initial studio was down, just removing the back seats of the main theater, and just put the console in there. Big open room recording. Everyone wore headphones. The band would set up on stage, and so talk about getting live performances. Everyone's on stage playing, and then the speakers are isolated in separate rooms. But wow, we did some amazing records there, and there was such a demand for it, which still surprises me to this day, that we built a second room upstairs with a humongous SSL, an 80 input J series, big wraparound thing, and that was busy all the time. It was so big that I would be doing 2 projects on it at the same time. There was the left side of the console, there's these 40 channels, and then these 40 channels, and that would be a separate mix over there on that side. And we would take shifts and be working day and night. And then we bought the adjacent buildings and put more studios in there. And at its peak, there were 5 rooms that were booked constantly. And that's where I met my partner now, Chris Johnson, is he came in to manage the studio. And he did a brilliant job, and the place was just slammed for a long time.
How did you manage to staff it with people up there? I mean, did people come in, or did you just find local people?
No local people. We didn't really. We didn't have the open doors for the local people to come in. It was kind of our own little island there. No one really knew what was going on. But people would come up from LA. I had actually engineers come in to staff from all over the United States, and from Australia and Poland, and from Israel.
Amazing.
Maor Applebaum. Do you know Maor?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, mastering engineer, brilliant mastering engineer. He was on staff for a while at Radio Star, and several other people that have gone on to do some great things started there. You know, fresh out of school, we would get some interns from the big schools like Full Sail and Crass.
Right.
So,
and did you reach out to the schools, or did people just reach out to you and you'd interview them? And
both ways. And we weren't just getting students; we were getting seasoned engineers too, from LA and from all over the place. Yeah,
right.
It was great, and it's inexpensive to live there.
Right.
So, and we had accommodations on site, and including like big rooms with lots of beds. So it was kind of like there was a bunkhouse, and interns could come in, and if you want, you can stay here. Here's a bed for you,
Right. It's kind of a commune thing.
It was a commune, and we'd have big dinners in the main lobby of the theater, because I built a commercial kitchen in there, and people would bring in, clients from all over the world. There was a Japanese band, and a Norwegian band, and Australians, and New Zealanders, and South Americans, like Colombians, and everyone would bring in their food and share, and it was just fantastic. It's still kind of a dream.
It's amazing. I mean, it's like the Northern California version of Real World, where that was always the thing. Everybody always ate in the communal dining room. So you'd get
this
these
was
crazy
the budget
things.
version of Real World.
So were most of the projects coming there to work with you specifically, or did it just have a life of its own as a facility?
Well, I learned a lot from working with Rick and with Prince, who would have multiple rooms running at the same time. Rick would come in to a session, and and spend some time, and then he would bounce over to another session at another facility or one at his house. I learned a lot from that. So most of these bands were coming to Weed to work with me, and I would have an engineer in every room, and I would assign an engineer to a project. So this engineer is going to be on this project the entire time. And we'll do a co-production, basically, is I'll bounce in, I'll be there for tracking. I'll give the engineer some instructions on where to take this project. And when it comes to overdubs, I'll be there for a little bit of the beginning of the overdubs, but then I'm going to bounce out of there and they'll just be doing their thing. And I'm going to go to another room and start another project. So we had staggered projects so I could bounce between rooms. It took all my effort
Yeah.
to do it, but it was fun and exciting. And we made some great music. That was the time when we were recording this, the Australians Cog, and they would come in and they had a lot of their own ideas. So it was not really a project. No one was left hanging like, what are we doing? Where's our producer? It was, for the most part, I'd say everyone left very happy with the results and did not feel neglected. So that can be done.
Yeah.
That's not how I'm doing it now. I only have one room right now. So, but that's how things were being done during those the Radio Star days. And it worked. Boy, we ran that thing for 15 years. It was awesome.
Right. It's amazing. And I think, there's blowback sometimes, especially at Rick, because it's sort of known that that's the way he does stuff. Like, well, he's not even there. But it's not about that. It's about if he was in the studio while you struggled with an overdub for 3 hours before you actually got what was going on, 45 minutes into that, it would have been scrapped. Whereas he can hear the finished result and go, either that's amazing, which means your 3 hours was very well spent, or say, that's not working, why don't you try this? And then you've actually got someone objectively listening to it, not thinking, we just spent 3 hours on it, therefore it must be good.
Exactly. And sometimes when you're in the middle of those days where you're struggling, you lose your perspective. So coming in fresh with fresh ears and a fresh perspective actually helped, I think, in a lot of ways with making decisions.
Yeah. I mean, and I do that. That's how I mix, is I mix the entire record at once. I'd never work on just one song because I don't know what it is. There's no context. And I kind of like it when I've got more than one project going because you just bounce back and forth. So to do that as a producer, I mean, obviously the people part of that, you got to handle it, but as long as they're cool with it. But also that kind of set you up to record in a different way, right? Because you've got the desk in the room with the band. I mean, with the 500-seater, you're sort of far away, but you're not isolated. There's no control room. And that's something that a lot of producers really kind of like. I've only made one record like that, and it was awesome. We did a Weezer record in like the Malibu Civic Center, and it was incredible. And I love you're wearing headphones while you track, and then you listen to it on speakers after, but everybody is there, and especially having a physical stage. And is that something where you prefer that now, and that's the way you definitely want to track?
Well, I can use any type of situation. An open room doesn't scare me at all because I worked that way for so long. So I think that there's more of a connection between you and the artist when you're in the same room together, in particular with vocals, because I'll have the vocalist stand right next to me, with the mic, and I'll have headphones, they'll have headphones, and we're looking right at each other. There's nothing between us. There's no glass where I have to push a talk back to let them know what's going on. It works so much better. And I think it eases the nervousness of a singer who might be self-conscious about what's happening and see people behind the glass talking and you can't hear them.
Yeah.
And you think they're obviously talking about how bad I am as a singer, that's just where the brain goes. So yeah, I guess, well, either way, I'm good in either situation, but I'm certainly not afraid of open room recording, and I'll never be afraid of it.
Right. Awesome. So, obviously then Radio Star stops, and now you're up in Oregon. So what was the thought process to going even further north? I mean, did you have any thoughts about possibly heading back a little closer to a recording city, or did you just decide like, nope, this is the best and I'm going to go even further away?
Yeah, there was a time when, well, there was a series of events that changed my life quite a bit. And that was, I got into putting on festivals. I put on a festival called the Blackbird Festival in Weed, and had about 6 stages in downtown Weed, in various clubs and on the street. And it featured a lot of the artists that have come through Radio Star over time, and some new ones. And it was great. I loved it, and I thought, this is really what I want to do. So I planned for the following year a bigger and better festival, and there was a big snafu right before the festival was to be right before it was scheduled. There was a big snafu with the city of Weed, that they said that I couldn't use the downtown, I couldn't block off the downtown area to foot traffic or traffic at all. And this kind of screwed up my whole plan. And I put all this money into it, and I wound up losing. I mean, it was well attended. There were 5,000 people that showed up,
Wow.
but I made very little money. And because I couldn't sell tickets, I couldn't control the people coming in. So it was kind of a big free for all. And I lost my ass. And pretty much at that point, my husband walked out and never saw him again, literally. And yeah, so I went kind of underground for a while, and was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. The studio went down to life support. The staff went away, and I had one engineer. And my friend Chris came back around, and Chris, who had been managing, and he helped me through this period. And then it was a decision that we made together to move out of Weed. And so we went down to LA and looked around at different places to live in LA. And a friend of mine who was also a client gave me this humongous tour bus. He says, here, you can just have it. You live here. You don't, this will help you through this period. I was like, wow, great.
Right.
So we're looking for a place to park this massive tour bus. Maybe on the coast over in Malibu, there's a trailer park down there, some odd place. And we went there to look, and found that there is a space available there. And it was like, wow, okay, I'm going back to LA. And then we got caught in the traffic on the 405.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I don't know what was going on, but it was such a nightmare that both of us looked at each other and said, no, we're not moving here. No, we can't do it, because living in Malibu or living anywhere and trying to get across town, it's just
Oh, you can't. You can't.
Yeah, you live in your car. And so I decided to move up to where Chris was in Ashland, which is really a very cool little university town. SOU, Southern Oregon University, is here. And it's got culture, the Shakespeare festivals here. It's kind of just an idyllic life. And we took some time. I actually took the city of Weed to court over the issue that we had, that they sprung on me at the last minute to wreck my festival. And I won a settlement. And with that money, we hunkered down and wrote this book. We spent time to write this book called Recording Unhinged.
Yeah.
And that's how we were able to write this book, is because I got this chunk of money from the settlement, paid off everybody that I owed money to, because everyone was just like I owed everybody. But there was enough money to keep us floating for enough time. like 4 or 5 months to just take some time and write this book. So that's how that happened.
Well, because we haven't really talked about the artistic side and the visual arts side of
Oh,
Sylvia Massey.
yeah.
Because look, everybody has seen the coloring book. I hope they've seen Recording Unhinged. Like it's, and all of your illustrations. It's very like if George Crumb grew up in a recording studio and didn't draw as many naked people kind of
Thank
thing,
you.
which is amazing. But prior to all of that, or maybe you were already doing it, you were the queen of the Polaroid. Polaroids
Yeah.
with Sharpies, that was your thing, and they were amazing. They were in studios all over LA. People, oh, did you see what Sylvia did with this one? So you've always done this. It's obviously been a part of your life, and we haven't even mentioned it. So when did all
Uh,
that start?
well, I always had a kind of a artistic bent, and I love illustrating. Um, but I figured out that when I was a student, that art is very solitary um, activity, and in graphic art is especially graphic art is where you would make money, but you're drawing furniture or doing someone else's idea and not your own. So as far as a job goes, art wasn't it. So I kind of put that aside. That was just for me for fun when I had some time to do it. And so I would doodle during sessions. And actually, Adam Jones from Tool showed me how to doodle on developing Polaroids. And when you do that, you take a Polaroid with like 600 film, and as it's developing, you take the cap actually of a Sharpie and you rub all over it, and then you crinkle it up, and then you light it on fire or something, and all these amazing colors come
Yeah.
out of the Polaroid development, as well as the image is still there. So if you plan your Polaroid right, you can have your image in a certain place and just have this amazing kaleidoscope of color around it. So I did a lot of that, and luckily was able to do that with a lot of the bigger artists that I worked with during that time, including Flea and Johnny Cash and Tom Petty and the guys from System of a Down and Rick. And
So I'm assuming you've got boxes of them somewhere.
I do. I actually have boxes, and some of them are very incriminating because there are sessions where people aren't wearing clothes. It
Speaking
happens.
of Flea,
Yeah. But yeah, so I have that. So it wasn't until more recently that I started really getting serious with the art. And that was because of, I have to say, my pal Chris. I have to say that he supported me on that from day one and bought my first painting. I was in the doldrums from losing the festival, and and he said, just why don't you just paint? You never paint, just paint. And here's a canvas. And a pal of mine came over and we just painted together. And I painted these birds. And Chris saw it and he says, I want that. And he bought it. And it was like my first sale. Okay. So I've continued painting and doing this art. And we incorporated the art into the book that we wrote together. But I'm still painting. In fact, I've got a painting in the works. And let me see if I can switch cameras to show you
yeah,
what
yeah.
this painting looks like, because it's
Yeah, because I've
just
taken myself off Facebook, so now I don't get any of your updates, which is kind of bumming me out.
you're out of Facebook, huh?
Yeah, just for a minute or two.
Let's
We'll see how long it
see.
lasts, but yeah.
Let's see this one. Which camera is that? That's that one. Okay. I think I can turn this camera. Here it is. There we go. Okay, I'm going to switch cameras now. There we go. So you can see
Oh,
in the back
yeah.
of it right there. It's a giant light bulb. And it's just in progress though, but it's a huge and very colorful, and it will be um, it'll be great when it's finished. I'll post a picture of it.
That's awesome. Do you have any plans to publish the non-incriminating Polaroids? as a book of photography?
I haven't thought about that, but I have enough to do a pretty interesting book.
It'd be pretty amazing, I think, because
Yeah.
because that's those session Polaroids are always way more candid than any other picture anybody took, and
Yeah.
obviously to a fault. And you don't put those ones in the book, but as a document, it's also funny how many engineers are really into photography. I mean, I'm not because I'm terrible at it, but like Chad Blake is a fantastic photographer, and there are a lot. Eddie Kramer also, tons of
Right.
pictures.
Legendary.
And
Yeah.
so, and your Polaroids are the same thing. They're a real document of what you were up to. So get them out there. We want to see
All
them.
right.
We want to see them. So we've skipped over your penchant for recording through pickles and sausages and potatoes.
Right.
So we could talk about that just as a thing. Because obviously you did it, if people want to see it documented, you did it on a video you did with the Melvins, recording through a pickle. But I did a seminar in New Zealand that you had done the previous year. And the first day, you just took them to a junk shop. Like, hey, we're going to go get some crap and we're going to make stuff and then record through it. And so obviously your dad's the engineer. You've been tinkering things. You built a car. He built the cassette deck. And so this is in your blood to not be afraid to just mess with stuff. But there's a leap somewhere about recording through a potato. So what actually got you going on recording through food stuff?
Well, now you know the people at Mix with the Masters, and there's a group of people that put on seminars in France, and I went there. It was during one of these seminars that, again, we're sitting around the dinner table, and we're like, "Hey, I wonder what you can take a potato and put it and actually." Turn it into a clock, like
Right.
it'll run
Yeah,
a
it
small
becomes
clock,
a battery.
right?
Yeah.
It becomes a battery. So I thought, well, then that means that potatoes are basically conductive in some way. So what if you recorded with it or turned one into a microphone? Can we do that? And everyone's laughing, and it's like, okay, it's enough to laugh about it. Okay, let's try it. So we actually set up an amp. And instead of putting the potato in where you would imagine you would put your potato filter between the microphone or the
No. You need some
instrument
power.
and the right. So it's not enough to put it in between the source and the amplifier. You have to put it between the amplifier and the speaker. And we tried it with a Marshall head, and I think it kind of smoked that Marshall. So we got another amp, a solid state amp, and the solid state will take it with no problem. It'll run, and you just have to have a very powerful amp and turn it up quite a lot. Maybe even have a preamp, and then you put your potato filter between the speaker out of the amp and your speaker. Now there's two lines that run out to the speaker. So we used two potatoes, positive
Oh, you put a potato. Oh, right. I was thinking you'd leave
potato.
the negative alone and only have a positive potato, but you had
you
had bipolar spuds on this circuit.
we did both, and it actually worked, and we actually recorded with it. It was a revelation, and that's when things really got started.
Wow.
The one thing about someone tripped back there. One thing about potatoes in particular is that they cause a lot of attenuation. And so, but there is a nice high shelf. So you'll get a little sparkliness out of your potato filter.
Right.
But then we started thinking, well, what else can we use? And this, first, when we were at the seminar, the brain cells were just going overtime.
There's a lot of wine at that seminar.
Yes.
Yes.
A lot of good wine and cheese. I love the cheese, but that's for another discussion. So we actually did the same thing with a drill, like a Dremel. Is I thought, well, I'd like to hear the electronics of a drill. So using the same kind of setup between the speaker out of the amplifier and the speaker, we had the signal diverted through this drill. And incredibly, the drill started up. And I think that, who was it that told me? Oh, Ed Cherney. Ed Cherney had told me a story about this when he was working with a band, recording a band, that he actually did this with a drill. So it inspired me to, well, let's try it. And in fact, it starts to drill up. You get not only the sound, the filtered sound of your audio going through the circuitry of the drill, but you get the harmonics of the drill running, and this incredibly unbelievable, interesting sound. You have to be very careful though, because you're dealing with a lot of power. And so we were very careful when we're setting things up. Nothing is plugged into the wall. But then once everything is set up, then you plug in and you crank it and go. I continued with this kind of idea of using filters, and I've done a lot of work in this now, just for fun. But I found out that, well, for one thing, I plugged in some hot dogs. All right, so you got your positive and your negative hot dog.
Yeah.
Right? Pretty flat. It's not really doing a whole lot.
Really interesting. But it does cook the hot dog, I would assume.
Well, it heats up the hot dog. But then if you use it on a cheese dog, amazing blues tone.
Really?
Yes. And so what is the difference between a hot dog and a cheese dog? It's cheese. So it wasn't until then that I thought, well, let's just go with the straight cheese, cut off a piece of Gouda, plugged in a positive and a negative Gouda, and amazing blues tone. It's an incredible sound.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, have you?
And I think it's because of the sodium content.
Now, have you experimented with just the single pole version of these,
yes,
or do you always?
It actually works better. It works better to do one side instead of both.
Okay.
So now I've created rigs now where I have special cables where one side is diverted and with pins, so I can stick various filters into it.
Now,
as well, there's one other thing that works amazing in its to divert the signal in through a light bulb. So different types of light bulbs will give you different types of effect. Because of the different filaments. Also, the LED has a certain sound. Incandescents are the best fuzz you've ever heard. And so
they probably don't last long, though, do they?
No, of course they're fine.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah.
Wow. And pickles as well.
Pickles don't sound that great. Honestly, it's pretty crackly. And you need a lot of salt content in your pickle. You can't do a sweet pickle. You got to do
a dill. Really interesting. Because there's a great, I think it's from Stanford. There's this amazing physics professor in Stanford. He's one of the first guy to do an online class, and it's a free online class through Stanford. He teaches Physics 101, and he's talking about conductors, and the pickle is his conductor to show that anything can be a conductor. Switches off the lights, basically plugs the pickle into the wall, turns bright red, and then explodes. But it's really good. So pickles they're a thing.
Same thing with your audio. When you're running audio through it from the speaker out of your amplifier, you're lighting up that pickle too. The pickle does light up. And
now
start smoking.
Is this now like a part of making records, or it's always still sort of a joke? Or do you really think like, man, the Gouda is the thing for this solo?
I don't bring it out on every session. But what I do is I try to make every session memorable in some way, whether it's by doing this experimentation with different filters. The artist, once you get started on this type of thought, the artist will start throwing out ideas and will try to.
That's because they're not paying
set
for the pickles.
aside a day, after everything is recorded to do the experimentation, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. but I try to build in some special event into every session to make that time really memorable. Recently, I worked with a band named Hydroform, and they came up to do a record with me. And I scheduled, they wanted a sound effect of an explosion because one of the songs was about pirates on a ship with the cannons and everything. So, I could have just grabbed a cannon sound off of a sound effects record, but how fun is that? I mean, we wanted to blow
You've
shit
done
up.
that.
So
You did that when you were
yeah,
9. That's old news.
right. So we wanted to blow shit up. So we got a bunch of tannerite and put it in a barrel. And then I put a mic in the barrel, a sacrificial mic. And then we stood really far back. Tannerite explodes when you shoot a gun into it. So we took a rifle, and I didn't actually shoot it. I had some help with that. But the thing blew up. Amazingly, this microphone, the Aston Spirit, survived beautifully, recorded the perfect cannon sound, and I used it. So, but that band, Hydroform, will never forget that time
No.
out there.
And
Never forget
dragging
it.
guitars behind motorcycles, throwing them off cliffs.
Yeah, surfing on guitars. Yeah,
And it's all going back to Undertow, basically.
it is, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Hopefully, well, there's a kind of a strategy behind this type of thought. Also, is that when you schedule a day to do this kind of experimentation, this fun thing that we're going to use as a reward for finishing our record, it kind of moves things along
You got
because
to
people
finish
are
the
looking
record.
forward to that. Is that no one dwells on this nitpicky shit that they get into with the guitar performance and all that. I mean, it really honestly gets things flowing a lot better if you have the carrot at the the carrot hanging from a stick at the end of your session.
So, all right, so we got the explosion. I already know from reading that the guitar down the cliff thing wasn't as cool as you thought it was going to be.
No, we threw a guitar off a cliff and recorded it crashing down into the ocean. That was at Indigo Ranch. Ultimately, we didn't use the recording because it just sounded noise. It wasn't really as useful as I thought it would be.
Right.
But again, no one's going to forget about that whole thing. We all smile
So,
about it.
what are some other triumphs of that ilk?
Well, part of that whole idea is also remote recording in unusual places.
Yeah.
So there was a Norwegian band called Animal Alpha that we actually set out. This was our reward at the end of the session. We were going to record the last song in a van driving through San Francisco down Lombard Street, with a street that goes like this.
Yeah.
The band set up in the back, and we're recording, everyone being thrown around. And the recording actually came out pretty good. But amazingly, but no one will forget that one. And then we recorded the band Thunder Pussy at a nuclear power plant, an abandoned nuclear power plant in the cooling silo. It's not really called
The
a
cooling
silo.
tower.
It's a cooling
Yeah.
tower, right? Giant concrete tower, and the acoustics in there were unbelievable. We've done recordings in abandoned subway stations of the underground in London. We went to one of the stations there, got permission. It took a while to get permission, and it cost money to actually get us down there. But that was one of our rewards. That was for the band Goddamn.
Right. Which is another great record.
Great record. Wow. And we used that recording on the record, actually. That came out great. Some other places. We recorded in a tomb, a band called Spiritual Front, an Italian band. There's Etruscan tombs in the outside of Rome, and we went there and set up in one of those tombs, got permission, and set up and recorded in there. That was spooky. There were bats. It was really special. Sometimes you can be surprised at how it changes your performance if you're in an unusual environment with a special acoustic. I mean, if you think of the idea of having a singer sing in a studio with a microphone in a controlled environment with soundproofing and such, and then you have the singer step into a cathedral and sing the same part in a cathedral, you're going to get a completely different performance. And that's the magic of using your space as part of your instrument, basically, and as a production tool to help enhance your performance, because you're going to get a completely different performance if you're playing in a tomb.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
also I think it's a slightly nicer way to motivate them than hanging them upside down. So
That has happened too. Yeah. Yeah.
you can tell that one if you want.
Yeah. That was Serge from System of a Down. We did, we sang it. I can't remember even which song it was on the album, but we tried to have him sing upside down, but it was, I abandoned that whole idea right away because he started screaming a part, which is he's supposed to be screaming in the song, and his face got really red, and so I made him stop because I didn't want to kill him. Hanging upside down and singing, not necessarily the best thing to do.
No, but can I make a wager that the next take was the take that got used?
Yes, you're right about that. Yeah. And then once he was standing on his feet again, it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's because part of it is like, okay, it's whatever the thing was, but it's like having that free day at the end. It just snaps your perspective back out. So instead of obsessing about something, it's like, well, I was just hanging upside down. I didn't die. All right, let's sing this thing now. Instead of like, oh God, I got to do another take and worrying about what wasn't right on the take before, and like, because it's usually not something you can fix. It's just you got to get the headspace right. So I love that idea.
And again, like if your singer is in a studio and all they can think about is the part of the throat that's not working well, they can't get into that mood where you're detached from your voice and it's just a channeling of the song. So you put them into an unusual space, they're thinking more about that space than the throat. You can do simple ways of distracting your singer too, just by having them like stand on a box or a chair. Their mind is not on their throat anymore. Their mind is on trying not to fall off the chair. You know, you can do simple things to distract, not to say that, you know, make your singer stand on a chair all the time. But one thing I'll have a singer do, a very simple thing, is just to stand in front of the mic and, okay, this performance, I want you to use your hands. I want you to express every word with your hands. And when you do that, you can hear the pressure in your voice changes and the expression comes through, and you can really, it's a transfer the emotion of a song through your hands. So I'll always have a singer, if they're not giving me the performance that I think they could have, I'll have them try these different things, you know, working with their hands, or the certain way of breathing to get them out of that inner thought of their vocal cords not working properly, their instrument not working properly.
Yeah, I think it almost, I mean, it does matter what you do, because some of those things will be very specific and will make them kind of realize things. But a lot of it is that they're thinking consciously about the thing they're talented at, which, as you can't analyze that shit. As soon as it's not unconscious, you can't do it. But they think, most people who are talented at anything, and this isn't just musicians, I mean, it goes for a lot of producers and engineers, when they're good at something, they just take it for granted and don't think it's that big a deal. So then therefore now they've got to step up, and now I've got to intellectualize and I've got to be better. Instead of like, no, you need to not think at all and just do it, the thing that got you here in the first place.
Right.
So.
Right. And that's where that distracting, you know, the Garth and Rage with an audience. If they're performing to an audience, they're not thinking about how they're playing. They're just playing. You know, they've got an audience to look to. So it really helps to have like that kind of trick to get you out of your head.
So I want to ask about one other record because it's something you did really recently, and it's really cool. Is the Taylor Hawkins record?
Ah, right.
And there's a track, and I'm terrible with song names. It was on your list, and it's the one where basically it's Jane's Addiction halfway through. It's with Chris Chaney and Perry Farrell, and they're like on the table. But sonically, there that mix is crazy, and it's got the Dave Grohl scream, and then it's got Taylor singing like Bowie, and it sounds like fucking Bowie. Then it's Jane's Addiction really small on a table, and it sounds really small. How much of that was you just like, this is a scene change, I'm going to do this, and then they're reacting to that, and how much of that was intent? Because it's crazy, and it works so well.
Well, the tracks they sent were everything was there, but I did enhance a lot of that particular song is called "I Blew It."
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted it to have a certain kind of monstrous sound, so I added a lot of subharmonics, a lot of pitch, pitching into lower octaves on the guitar. So the guitars all sound like raw, in certain parts, though not for the whole thing. And then I went back and I listened to my favorite Jane's Addiction, and I matched that sound on the vocal because there's a scene change there. I wanted it to sound like, okay, here's Jane's for a minute and then back. And then the Bowie thing. Well, Taylor's freaking amazing writer. He's really good, and he's a great singer. He is quite worthy of being known much farther than just being the drummer of Foo Fighters.
Right. Well, it's awesome, and getting the Jane's vocal sound. I mean, that is a sound. There's no one else who's ever sounded anything like that, and it's not just the voice; it's the treatment.
Yeah.
And it's different now.
The original thing was that was Dave Jordan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and it's like a kind of a tight delay, kind of in a way that it's almost hard to understand the lyrics,
Right, but it's really, really cool. I wanted to ask you two things because you sent playlists, and I'm sure Mark's going to share links to the playlists. And I love getting these playlists, and I also love they're so short. You have to leave stuff off because it makes them more eclectic, really. The first thing I noticed was you sent video links to everything, and I'm just curious: was that like a conscious decision, or it's like, well, that's how you make lists of songs, or you feel like you got to see the videos too, or it was interesting because most people just send either just a text list or they do Spotify or something like that. But every one of yours was a video.
I think that we consume music now. That's how I consume music is with video.
Right.
I think that as a medium, music needs or today it's almost a requirement to be ready for video in some way. Just like what we're doing here now.
Right. Well, I mean, and that was a big thing up at Radio Star too, right? You put a whole video production side into that. So you could have your EPK, your DVD making of, like everything as you walked out the door, right?
Yeah, we started doing that quite early, and I would like to continue with that. Now, I think that whenever there's a session, we do a lot of footage. We have a lot of footage, whether we're shooting or the client is shooting, because that becomes really useful later. And I also do quite a lot of video production, music videos after we finish our albums, even if it's just the simplest of video ideas, whether it's a live thing or we're going to do a little vignette to one of their songs. I'll do that quite a bit.
Right. Yeah, it's great. And then there are two things on the inspiration playlist I wanted to mention. Okay. One is Tomorrow Never Knows is on there, and I think it's on there for the exact same reason I have it top of my list. Just for me, that was this thing that I heard that made me realize that making records was a thing. Like, that's not a band. And that blew my mind. And I don't know, 6 or 7. And it still was like, what the hell is going on in the coolest
Yeah.
way possible? And as someone is obsessed with sound effect records, I would imagine that was a favorite the second you heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that album was a gift from my parents because they knew about the song Yellow Submarine, and it seemed to be like a kid's song. Little did they know that it's like the rest of the record has a lot of psychedelics in it. But that particular song, yeah, that changed my perspective of music, and my listening changed after that. And but yeah, I was a kid in the basement of my parents' house playing vinyl and listening to that song over and over again on my Revolver album. Uh, the parts of it that stand out is the rhythm of the drums, which is so awkward and angular. The sound effects of these birds or whatever it
Yeah,
is, uh, and then the effects on the vocals, and then the I think there's a sitar kind of running backwards. There's a lot
yeah,
of backwards.
yeah,
So yeah, that really was fascinating to me. But I think even more so later was listening to Yes, Fragile was an album that when I listened to uh, which song was it? There's a song that John Anderson wrote and recorded all the parts for. I didn't understand about multi-tracking until I listened to that Yes Fragile album and I heard multiple layers of the same voice,
right.
and doing harmonies and stacked and call and answer, and then I realized that's all the same singer. And how the heck did they do that? And I'm a kid listening to this, just mind being blown. So that's when I became aware of the multi-tracking and that you're layering one thing over another. Yeah, it was those albums are really important. I think there's another one that was very important to me that became important when I was at university was the album. It was called Raiders of the Lost Dub, and it was by Sly and Robbie, who are
Yeah,
remixers. They're dub remixers of reggae, classic reggae songs. And here again was, and I love dub because it's full of sound effects and this and that. But I listened to that record and I realized, holy cow, that's that Black Uhuru song that I love off of this album. Those are the same exact tracks, but for some reason this has all these effects and stuff. And it wasn't until my band in college went into a recording studio, my first time in a recording studio at Hyde Street in San Francisco, and we recorded a demo. And that wonderful engineer at the end of it said, "Okay, Sylvia, here you want to do your own dub mix. Here's the delay, this knob right here. Here's your reverb. This is what that does. Okay, I'm going to record and run down the song, and you bring in your faders and you put on your effects like you're making a dub." And I did it, and then that was it. That's what I wanted to do. I
wow.
had I knew how to use the equipment from radio experience, but it was then that I really knew that being a producer and being an engineer was as important in the creative process as being a musician. So it really opened my eyes.
That's amazing. Yeah, dub reggae's got such a bizarre history too, because there's some, I mean, like Lee Scratch Perry and
Ah,
Mad
yeah,
Professor and those guys who really just exploded what you could do with really simple gear and all of that. But at the same time, they were only doing it because they had to have B-sides. They'd record an A-side and like, well, we can't press a single-sided 7-inch. So they'd just do an instrumental and like, well, that's boring. So that's when they started doing the dub versions just to have a B-side because they're bored. And then, it's just, it makes everything better. But there's one other song on your inspiration playlist that I just wanted to mention only because it is one of my favorite songs in the history of songs. And I actually had kind of forgotten about it and not listened to it in a long time. And it's Snowman by XTC. And I'd
Oh,
love to
yeah.
know why that's on your list because I love that entire record. Well, I'm going to talk after you, but you
All
first.
right. Yeah, that's from the English Settlement album. At that time, I was very interested in production, but hadn't really got started yet. But that particular album hit me because of the sounds, the drum sounds. And this was a band that I loved because of their sense of humor. Again,
Yeah.
XTC always sounded like Andy Partridge always sounded like he was ready to burst out laughing when he sang. And the mood created by these songs, especially that song Snowman, it starts with a crescendo and then the beat comes in and you're just like, whoa, this is really cool. And his lyrics are mumbling, almost incoherent, except for the chorus, the snowman part in the chorus. And it's hard to even know what the song is about. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I love the sparkliness of it too. There was a kind of very high part of a piano tinkling through the whole thing too. And there's a sonic spectrum. Hugh Padgham produced that. And I just have to say that's like one of the greatest productions. It's a double album too, and every song is great. Anyway, that's one of my favorites. I'm so pleased to find out that
I
you're
love
also
it.
a fan.
I love it. And for
Yeah.
me, that song, I was actually in the Bay Area because it was in '86, I think, when I first heard that record.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I was working at Music Annex for a summer and heard that record. And I didn't stop listening to it all summer. And that song for a, adolescent or post-adolescent male is like she treated me like a snowman. Like, I don't know what the hell the song is about, but it's like, it's about me. It's about me getting
But
treated like a snowman. Like, I guess that's a bad thing, but it's a beautiful song. But that entire record, again, the snare sound is
yeah,
completely different on every single song.
yeah, yeah.
And it has one of the single greatest manual phaser moves on the drums of any record ever made, which
Isn't
is
that a wonderful thing?
it's either Jason the Argonauts or one of the other ones where
Jason,
it cranks
Jason, I,
down for the entire bridge of the song
right.
and then it goes wham and opens up over
Yeah,
the last two
yeah.
beats. It's
Have you
just
done that?
genius.
Have you done that before?
I
I
have.
got
It's
to be
one
really
of the
good at
things.
that.
It's one of the first things I did when I got a modular synth. Was I started doing manual phaser sweeps on
Oh,
drums.
really? I was doing it with 3 tape machines.
Well, see, you're much
Oh.
cooler than me. Much cooler. So, look, like I said, there are a million other records you've worked on. I think, though, before we bring Mark in for questions, if there are any records that I've skipped that you want to talk about, you should do that. But I think also you ought to talk a little bit about your obsession with microphones, maybe just a little bit,
Ah,
if you want.
oh, right. Yeah. Can I? Okay.
Yes.
Well, how did this all happen? Chris and I have been writing another book. The follow-up to Recording Unhinged is actually a book on vintage microphones, and our publisher asked for this book, and we started on it. And I've been visiting a lot of different factories around the world because up until COVID, I was traveling to Europe quite a lot. So I went to Gefell, where the Neumann factory used to be, the original Neumann, and been to Berlin to the headquarters of Neumann now. And I've been to Shure in Chicago. And Abbey Road to look at their microphone collection and document it. Also the EMI archives. I think I talked about that a little bit. BBC's, it went to the BBC and documenting all these collections. Well, Chris said, hey, there's a guy in Milwaukee who has a museum, a microphone museum. Why don't you go up there? Because I was there for another project. in Chicago area. So I got a rental car and drove to Milwaukee and met this old fella named Bob Paquette and looked at his microphone collection. And he was really old and kind of frail. And his son Joe helped show me around. He had a private museum up in his office in the upstairs of an old commercial building in downtown Milwaukee. And I realized when I got there that I was ill prepared. I didn't bring a proper camera, and there was not enough time on the schedule to document this immense collection of like 2,000 vintage microphones spanning from the beginning of the development of microphones. And so I scheduled a time. I said, hey, I'm going to come back, and it was really about a year before I was able to come back. So I scheduled a time when I would be coming back, but unfortunately, Bob Paquette passed before I was able to get back there to document. But I was in contact with Joe, and we discussed how we could keep this collection together, this incredible microphone museum. And so I set out to find a buyer for the whole thing because they wanted to sell it. The kids none of them were really had the passion for keeping this collection, and it would have been a shame to sell it off piece by piece, and very difficult actually. So I called all the usual suspects asking if they'd be interested to buy. A couple people were very interested enough to go visit, but unfortunately at the end, after about 6 months, no one stepped forward to buy this collection. And they were selling the building. So the mic collection had to go.
Right.
And so my buddy, Chris Johnson, he said, look, I'll take care of this. And he went up there and talked to Joe and made a deal that we would bring home this collection and we would pay for it. And we have time to pay for it. So it's much more than just a collection of 2,000 microphones. It also includes a really historic radio collection of vintage radios and broadcasting, and a lot of other specialized electronics that are vintage. So what we've been doing is selling off the radio parts of the collection with the hopes that we'll be able to pay back the Paquettes, what we owe for the microphones, and being able to maintain the collection as close to complete. There are duplicates of microphones in the collection, so we're selling off the surplus there too. So it's been a real fun time. I mean, we're right on schedule with sales. I've been doing a lot of online selling, but the idea of writing this microphone book took a sharp left turn when we brought home this collection.
Yeah.
It's only been, he brought it home in December, and we stopped unpacking last month. So, and I've been inventorying, and every time I open up a new package and look at this microphone, I don't know what it is, and I have to research it either with Bob's immense documentation collection, or online. I'll go online and find out about it, or someone will help me. I put out a social media request for someone who might have information. Do you know about this microphone? Please let me know. So I've had to start over with the book, basically because I thought everything I thought I knew about microphones, I don't know anything about microphones. I had to start over. It's amazing. And I thought that the best mics in the world were only these Neumanns, the vintage Neumanns are the most desirable. But in fact, there's so much more. And I mean, you can attest to that the early RCA microphones are fabulous ribbons. The Western Electric mics of the 20s and 30s are, they're dark, but they're fantastic and rich. And there's just a whole world of different vintage mics that I never thought that now that I'm getting deep into it, I'm going to restore each one of these if I can, and find the right connectors and wire them correctly so that I can actually use them on these sessions in different ways, and listen to them, and hopefully do a video series with like a microphone a day or something like this,
Right.
which we can really get into. Like, let's listen to this thing. Let's talk about the history of it. Let's look at the technology behind it. And I could go on and on about this. It's really exciting for me. And for instance, okay, and I brought out a few mics to talk about,
Great.
but here's one, right? So Alexander Graham Bell in 1876 invented the first telephone, which was a microphone. And I have it's a liquid transmitter. Can you see that thing? There
Wow.
it is. Right? Can you see
That
it?
looks like
Dark.
what he was using. That looks familiar to me when you mention his name.
Right? Yeah. And Alexander Graham Bell, this is a liquid transmitter, so it captures the vibrations on the surface of the liquid, which was kind of an oil of some sort. You can see, here it is, right?
Yeah.
This is not the original one from Alexander Graham Bell. It's a reproduction that was from the 1920s, something like that. It was
Oh,
very
so
popular.
it's new crap, basically.
Yeah, it's only from the 20s, right? But okay, in 1878, let's see, it was in the 1870s, right? After Alexander Graham Bell's invention, that this was created. Now, this is this when I first pulled it out of the box, I opened it up and I was like, well, what is this? You know, it looks like it might be a piece of a telephone, but someone stripped out all the insides, like there's nothing in it. And I showed it to Chris, and he says, no, that's the microphone right there, right? What this is, I can't even believe it, right? This was developed by David Edward Hughes. It's the first carbon microphone, and it's a carbon pencil. So
Right.
it's set up right like this, and you have a wire coming off of this post and a wire coming off of this post. And within that, there's a battery and then a small earpiece that you would hold up to your ear to hear. So this could be actually in another room. And
Or
what this
you could
is,
wear it around your neck, spy cam kind of thing. No one would know.
well, you could,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's no way to record at that time, right?
No, no. And did it
That
have a
came later.
horn through that hole in the front, or was that it?
No, that's just a little hole. And then this would pick up the vibrations. It's a carbon pencil. This is a burnt stick.
Yeah.
This is all right. Did you know that microphones were made from burnt sticks?
I knew about the carbon mics because I used to teach
Right.
about them. But I've never seen one like that. It was always like the little cups of iron filings that would get compressed by a
Sure, the
diaphragm.
granulated carbon. That
Yeah.
came later. That was a Hunning's invention. But yeah, the burnt stick I never knew about. And not only that, but crystal microphones, right?
Mhm.
I did not know that crystal microphones, piezoelectric microphones, were made from a very thin slice of quartz crystal. Did you know this?
I did, but that's because I'm a geek. But go on.
Right. So, and then you can make your own quartz. You can, or it's not, I'm sorry, you can make your own crystal. You can culture salt, Rochelle salt, and slice it. And that piece of slice will give you an electric charge that
Yeah.
translates into.
As you deform it, the electrons
Yes.
go whizzing off. It's the same thing in lighters. You're deforming a piece of quartz that then throws the spark. That's what the spark is in electric.
Oh my
The
God.
little push
Okay.
button
Okay.
lighters.
But all this is just blowing my mind because
It's incredible.
okay, a burnt stick, okay, a piece of a rock, these are microphones. What?
Yeah, I mean the fact that they find things out about materials and somebody decides, well, I'm going to make a microphone out of that. Like that's where this technology is
Right.
going to go. It's
Right.
incredible.
So I feel much better about plugging in potatoes and stuff because it's like, hey, there you go.
Exactly.
Right? All right.
Exactly. All right, it's amazing. It's amazing. And you're the perfect person to be dealing with this. There's nobody else on the planet who's equipped to deal with this collection.
It's going to be a great book. In fact, we're probably going to have an encyclopedia because there's so
I would
much
think so. And
information.
publishers love it when you change direction midway through a book.
Right. They love it.
They're
Yeah.
really into that.
Yeah.
Well, should we get Mark in here and get some questions? What
Let's
do you
do it.
think? Let's see what the peeps think. I mean, my cats are going a bit nuts, but I
Hello.
think they can be left to themselves. Hey, Mark.
Hey.
How
All
are you?
right. So the cats and I are entering
Yeah,
at the
Squid here. I'll turn it over because Squid's going to help answer some questions, I think.
Oh,
All
squid.
right.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's see if we have some questions for Squid. Okay. Okay. So Sylvia, how this works is on Crowdcast. People have the chance to submit their questions and then upvote each other's questions. So they've voted up questions to the top here. So we'll start at the top. And
Okay.
our first one
Cool.
comes from Santiago, and he says, in your most recent video series, Building Elko Connectors, which is very instructive, by the way, he says, you mentioned setting up a new studio. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah. I've built a studio and we're still building it right now. And let me see if there's a camera that I could give you a little overview of it.
The far shot's cool. It's a little out of focus, but it is cool.
It is a little out of focus, but here you go. You can see, hey, there I am. Hi. Yeah, it's a big horseshoe and it features several different consoles. And one is a loop trotter that has 500 series modules in it. And that's over here. I'll just point this camera. Maybe you can see it then. But we've got a loop trotter with a bunch of 500 series modules, and then a beautiful Rupert Neve 5088 over here. You can see it's split into two sections. Here is one section, then over there is the other section with the master, so that I can have my monitor in the middle, because I always thought it was just really uncomfortable to have a console that your field of your working field is in front of you, and you need to look at this monitor, and where do you put it, and where do you put your keyboard? It's difficult to work that way, to have your keyboard off to one side, your monitor off to one side. So this way I can be right in the sweet spot and work that way. And then there's another console over here. Let's see if I can give you a shot of that over here. I'm moving my camera around. Here, I'll just grab it. Over here. Am I getting it?
There it is.
Oh, that old thing. See that thing right there? That's a WEM right there. That is an old English live console that has some history. The classic album Who Live at Leeds was cut on that type of console. So that's part of the system here. Plus there's an old Western Electric behind there that I haven't even pulled out yet. And at the point where we get everything working, plus there's a ton of stuff from the Paquette collection. I got to just show you a little bit of that. There's all this, look at all these mic mixers here. There's a shit ton of them, right? Over there you can see there's Western Electrics, Remlers, there's Collins, Gates, just tons of stuff. So I'm going to have fun when this thing goes online, but it's still maybe a month away. We're going to have a Atmos mixing system here too, so it'll make it especially good. And then I think that I'll open up for workshops. It's a big enough space that we'll have room for at least 20, 25 people here. There's a bar in the next room. and a commercial kitchen, and there's a huge, it's a big facility. So we've got a lot of space to work with, and we're in a really beautiful part of the country. So here we go.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
Beautiful painting back there as well.
Thanks. It's a work in progress.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, let's see what else we have. Okay, so our next question is from Paul. And Paul says, "Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, Paul.
Can you talk about your process for coming up with creative ways to motivate musicians to get the performance the song needs?" Something on top of standing in the chair.
There's a lot to talk about with that. But one of the ways I help inspire is to give them an opportunity to come up with, hey, what's the craziest thing you've ever wanted to do? And see what they say. You know, if they don't really have a lot of imagination, then, well, that's okay. Then we'll just we'll get that record done and make it as good as possible. But usually we'll meet minds on trying to stretch the to stretch the boundaries of what you're supposed to do, or what the rules are, and make sure there are any rules. And then let's try to go farther than that. So yeah, I'll try to incorporate some kind of special event into each session, whether we're using a special piece of equipment, or I put one thing is I'll put an instrument that an artist is unfamiliar with in their hands and say, try this, or even just tuning an instrument differently than they're typically comfortable with. It will inspire that kind of creativity to have them play the same solo with this tuning and see what happens, Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to do it, but pretty much to get them out of their stiff thinking, it seems to help.
Yeah. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
No, it's the same thing, and we talked about it earlier too. Yeah, it's just trying to make them stop thinking about what they're trying to do, because they've never thought about it before, and they should stop thinking about it. So you just give them something else to focus on. Really,
right?
It's distraction more than anything else.
Distraction, yeah.
But I think like one thing about with singers, especially, because even if they've been in the studio a bunch, singing in a studio has just got to be the worst experience for a singer ever. So I will always have the singer sing with the band while we're doing basic tracks, even if we think we're only going to keep the drums. I don't care, because first of all, you get a great amount of feedback on the take, and that's how you'll know, like, oh, that's the take. You don't even have to listen back. But you also end up getting great vocal takes because there's absolutely no pressure, and they don't think you're going to keep anything. So They don't care, and they're not afraid to fail, and there's no thinking. So whatever version of that you can come up with for any instrument is what you need to do, I think.
Yeah, mistakes are usually well received in the studio because they become on purpose ideas, It's like, hey, take that I know that was wrong, but let's repeat it,
Yeah. I mean, I've had song structures because I was working on, I don't even remember like what I would be working on, but something, and I just like loop 2 bars of something, and like, oh, hold on a second, that's really cool, let's repeat that. And then you end up with this structure to the song where every chorus gets longer and longer and longer because you sort of get stuck, and then you explode out of it, and it becomes this incredible sort of tension and release that nobody would have come up with just like sitting around with a guitar. But yeah, just anything like that. And to keep your ears open for that stuff too is important, because it's easy to just ignore it.
Right.
Great. Awesome. Okay, our next question is from Lee Hudson. And Lee says, yes, hi Sylvia, looking at your discography, when do you get time to rest? I mean, wow, that's a lot of being busy. Best wishes, Lee.
Well, you keep doing this over years, your discography gets longer. I've been doing this a long time. It's like, the more chances, the more times you pull the handle on the slot machine, the the better your chances get that you're gonna to get something to stick. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any comments on work-life balance?
Well, it never seems to be work. I do what I love, so work life. This is it. I love it. I'm very happy.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so let's see. Our next question is from Pierced Ears Recording. And he says, "Hi, Sylvia. Could you speak a little further about recording Thunder Pussy in the abandoned nuclear power plant? How did it come to be? What does that sound feel like? And who do I contact to do it to?"
Right. That was done at a facility called SATSOP, SATSOP, outside of Olympia, Washington. And this was one of those things when Thunder Pussy and I were starting the session. I asked them, what's one of the craziest places you can think of that we could record? Someone mentioned that, yeah, there's this abandoned nuclear power plant. And I was like, oh boy, we're going to do that. And immediately Chris set out to get permission for us to go in there. And he did get the permission. We had to pay. We used part of the band's budget for a day in there. And I brought a rig that was a portable rig. It required power. And luckily there was shore power right there in the tower. So I used a Behringer X32 interface with my laptop with Pro Tools and a bunch of just generic mics, basically almost all dynamics, even though I think that the Behringer has the phantom power. But yeah, it was so good. It was the recording actually was used. I think we used it on the album. No, actually, we didn't use it on the album, but it was released separately because it was a stripped back version of what was on the album. But wow, acoustically, you would think that the reverb was so big that it would blur out all the parts, but in fact, we were close miking the instruments, so it was not blurry. It was huge, but there was definition within each instrument at the same time. So it was very successful. Sometimes these things don't work out, but this time it really did. And the video was an important part of it, which we will never forget, being out there in that power plant. But yeah, these kind of ideas, sometimes that you have to jump through hoops to get to use these spaces. Yeah.
I think what we've learned here tonight is that everybody needs a Chris.
Chris is quite helpful. Yes. Yes, everybody needs a Chris.
He's the shit.
You can't have mine.
No. I'll stick to Squid, who's actually melted. I'm just gonna. That's it.
Squid.
Yeah.
Oh.
Squid's had enough of this weather. Anyway.
I don't think Chris takes quite as many naps on the chair.
No. No, he probably eats more though. So, swings and roundabouts.
Yeah. Okay. Our next question is from Marcelo. And he asks, what is the record that you co-produced with Kirk Hammet that you mentioned earlier?
That was that Sea Hags record. That was very early. And where can we get it? Oh, it was actually re-recorded with Mike Klink.
But did your version ever get released at all, or?
No, I think that there's some secret tapes floating around there somewhere.
Right.
And I honestly think that the original demos are better, but that happens a lot.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. Our next question is from Adam Kessler. And Adam asks, how long did it take for you to get the vocals on Johnny Cash's I've Been Everywhere?
Ooh, that's a good question. We were working on tape. So you can imagine that cutting between takes was a challenge. And it was. I was punching in and out on certain words, and he was very patient and worked with me on that. Some of it I had to actually fly in from a different take, like a word that he never quite got. I would just have him sing it in another part of a tape without music, and then I would fly that into an H3000, the sampler, and then drop it into the performance. I'd have to work on that. That was stuff that I did outside of the sessions so that I wouldn't have Johnny sitting there waiting for those things. But yeah, it was a bear. That one was a bear. But I think it came out pretty darn good. It sounds like he almost did it all in one shot, but it certainly was not that.
Wow, the things you used to have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everyone thinks because the technology makes it so easy that now you do it, but we did exactly the same stuff on tape. It just sucked.
Yeah, it's so easy. Pro Tools just makes everything so easy.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, this next one is from K-Mac, and K-Mac asks, what advice would you give your young self today working in the current environment?
Oh. I would say, being that the equipment is so available now, it's not an exclusive club anymore, that you want to get a rig that will allow you to record as many people as possible, as many independent projects. They could be long distance, they could be in person with social distancing or whatever you have to do, but build your discography, because that's how you're going to gain the trust of people who will pay you to do this work. You need to have experience in some way and have a track record, a list of projects that you can actually put forward and say, listen to this, look at my list. These are people that I've recorded. Here's some of my best work, in order to solicit to be able to get the jobs that will make you money. Try to reach out to all genres that you're not necessarily comfortable with, because there's nothing like being pigeonholed into a genre of music that goes out of favor, and then you're kind of stuck doing Tool bands for the rest of your life. I purposely tried to keep my discography fluid with all kinds of genres of music, and from bluegrass to country to funk. I want to have the diversity in my discography to show that I'm much more than just a one-trick pony.
Yeah, certainly have. Andrew, can I flip that one to you as well?
Well, no, because I'm just going to ask Sylvia another question about it. Do you have any advice for women who want to get into the industry now, and what would be different? What do you feel like a woman is up against, and is there anything you feel like a woman needs to do, that especially because they're a woman, to overcome some of the things that are going on?
Well, the biggest one that I have already talked about even is that there will be a time in your career, if you start early, that you will have to make a decision of whether or not you're going to continue. I hate to say that it's so black and white, but it almost is, unless you have a support system that is so strong that you can have a family and delegate a lot of that responsibility to someone else in your relationship. It will be very hard to really reach as far as you want to with the career. Now, I don't want to discourage anyone from doing this, which is, I feel like that's what I'm doing, because it's just the most rewarding career of anything. I love it so much. that it's never work. It never feels like work. And so it depends on what you want out of life as a woman, to have self-fulfillment, or, what does that mean to you? So yeah, get ready for some turbulent times when you reach your mid-30s and see what happens. But don't be afraid to just go for it and to just just be your own person, and not dedicate your life to having a family. And that's the biggest thing I can say to women, because that will become an issue. It could become an issue for many women. Yeah, and also a few other nuggets of advice for women is, don't be easily offended or precious, because working in the studio, oftentimes, everyone is just being themselves. And sometimes if you're easily offended as a woman, you might be like, oh my God, like that. No. For me, I walk into a room and I start cursing right away. So like, they're just like, oh my God, guys just to say, oh yeah, she's all right. And they leave me alone. I tell them to fuck off if they bother me. So that's important. Don't be easily offended, and be someone that is fun to hang out with. In general, that would be for men or women. If you want to have success in working with musicians, make sure that you're someone that, of course, it's good to have chops, but also be someone that people want to spend time with. And that's extremely important too.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's see here. How are you doing on time, Sylvia?
I'm good.
Okay.
You're not going to beat Jack. Hey, just while we're waiting for the next question, just because I didn't realize it until last week, but there's a song on that Jellyfish record, the first one that Jack did, that has the Tomorrow Never Knows drum beat in the verses. Like completely. I love that record.
What an important record that. Isn't that an important record?
Yeah.
I remember hearing that record in Mio Vukovic's office at Geffen for the first time. He says, get a load of this. And I heard that and the drums. And I was just like, holy cow, the compression. I'd never heard anything like that before. And I looked at the name on there and it was Jack Joseph, the guy. Wow. That everybody was influenced by that heard that, I think, at the time.
But somehow it slipped past me for 20 years that they'd use the Tomorrow Never Knows drum beat, which is pretty recognizable,
Huh.
So anyway, sorry, Mark.
No, that's awesome. Okay, so our next one is from Alierpal, I think. It's your username. Oh, here we go, Alex. Okay, so Alex says, hi, Sylvia. I know you use RCA transformers across the stereo bus. Hold on, it just ran away from me. Well, I may have to. Okay, here we go. I know you use RCA transformers across the stereo bus. I've seen a photo of you with the Kazarog guys. And do you use the Kazarog transformer plugins at all? If so, how well do you think that they compare to your hardware transformers?
Well, let me show you what exactly I put across the stereo bus. It's over here. I'll grab it. Look at this. There it is.
Oh, wow.
It's a pair of Western Electric 111C transformers. And my good friend Devin Powers turned me onto this. He actually sent these over. And so Devin is the guy behind Kazarog, one of the guys. I would highly recommend Kazarog because these things are just really hard to find. So it gives the as the last stage of a mix, an analog mix, it just gives everything a really finished, woolly. It's called the sound of iron across your mix. It's not always appropriate, but I do use it a lot. And since I have this this actual physical unit, I don't use the Kazrog generally because I'm not mixing entirely in the box. I use a system with what's called the Dangerous Music Mix Master Complete, which has a summing mixer that breaks everything out, and the converters break it out into 16 channels of analog from Pro Tools, and then it's mixed in into the summing mixer, and there's an insert in the summing mixer that I can put whatever I want in. So I put this analog unit as the last step. Anyway, it's a fantastic thing. Again, at Western Electric 111C. And thank you, Devin. I highly recommend the Kazrog.
Awesome. Okay.
What else?
All right. Our next one is from Roy Long. And Roy asks if you can tell the story of that first punch-in with Prince.
First punch-in with Prince. That might be another
That ring a bell.
engineer. Yeah. Yeah. I have lots of Prince stories, though. Let me tell you a Prince story. Oh, my God.
Awesome.
Okay, so Prince, he would oftentimes, well, he had many, rooms going at the same time. And he had he was working the system. There was no doubt about that. But he had me mix a song one day. I had the Studio B at Larrabee, and I was mixing a song. It was about 7 minutes long off of tape. And it was really kind of a slow, sexy song about, what his lyric was like, something like, oh, baby, what I'm going to do to you tonight, kind of one of those kind of Prince songs. And I worked on it for a great deal of the day. Prince wasn't around. I didn't know when he was showing up. Nobody really knew when he was coming or going. So I worked on it until late into the evening. And I thought, well, if I keep working on this mix, it's just going to get worse. Because I'd put in all these drops and effect splashes. And I thought I really had a great blend on the vocals. And I thought it sounded damn good. So I didn't want to touch it anymore. So I just sat outside the studio and waited for Prince to show up. And he did eventually. He came busting through the front door of the studio of the building. And he had a girl with him on his arm. And he went straight into the room. And I stood up and I was like, oh, good. And I followed him into the room. I was going to play the track for him. I went up to press play on the SSL. And he looked at me, he says, that's all right. I don't need you. So, okay. So I went outside of the room and sat down on the couch, waiting for him to listen to the song and give me some feedback. And I was just like, oh God, he's going to love this mix. Right. And so I heard the music playing, and then I heard, it was about 7 minutes, and then the music stopped. And then I didn't hear, they weren't coming out. And then it was like, hey, what's going on in there? What's going on? And then all of a sudden he comes busting out with the girl. The hair is all messed up. They go straight out the front door. Not a peep, not a word on how the mix was. So
that song was a pickup line. That's all that was.
Yeah.
It was. It was all it was. He probably wrote it just for that date, and I wouldn't doubt it because he was that kind of guy. But yeah, I guess it worked,
So you just printed the mix and that was it, and then they never got nothing. And
yeah, nothing. not a peep. Yeah. I think it was good though. I thought it was good. But Prince, yeah, what a piece of work that guy was. Wow. I got tons of stories. Anybody who's worked with Prince would have stories like that.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you did your job on the mix.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. How about one more? Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go. A lot came in at the last second. Okay, here we go. When working with these awesome microphones that you have, do you have any go-to preamps, or do you think the mic is more important? Is the more important variable? Sorry. P.S. Love your work and greetings from Germany.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And well, I do think mic preamplifiers are important. Maybe even more important than the mic. So keeping that in mind, on a typical session, I might use very pedestrian mics. You could call them pedestrian, I guess, which would be your typical SM57s, nothing's particularly, precious. But now that I got this collection, my intention is to actually start listening to these. The way that many of them are built, like, for instance, let me just drag over a mic here. Right. This is a Western Electric 47A. Can you see that? Oh wow! I'm gonna change my my camera if I can here, so I can show you this mic. Is that it? No. Hang on. No, not that one. Is that it? Yeah, there you go. Okay, here we are. I got a new video set up here, still experimenting with. So thank you for your patience here. Oh, come on, you. All right.
It's pretty great, though. I'm looking forward to seeing content from that.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So here's a kind of a close-up of this mic. It's a big bottle with a capsule on it with an adjustable yoke. This is one of the earliest condenser mics. And you might think, Neumann had the fantastic condenser bottle in the late 20s, in the 30s. This actually precedes that. And the earliest condensers in Germany by AEG used these capsules, which was a 394 capsule. So it's an early tube mic. There's tubes in here. But here's my issue. Look at this connector here. So a lot of these older mics had their own proprietary connectors. And it's going to take a while for me to find the documentation to really understand these. Luckily, many of these mics also have preamplifiers that are in the collection that I'm keeping. And I showed you a little bit of those preamps on the wall. Here, let me just point that camera here at the collection. You can see the whole mic collection up here. Oh boy, the lights are in the way, but you can see all the mics. This is part of the collection. And then all those preamps that we have up here. And so it'll take a while for me to match the microphone to the preamp and to get the right connectors and such. But the intention is to get it all done. If I could use the same mic preamplifier to really compare them individually, A, B, then I'll try to do that. But right now I'm just trying to figure out how to connect some of this stuff up, because these connectors are so odd, and every mic has a different connector, some Amphenol, some completely proprietary, early versions of Canon connectors, which I didn't know were so many. There's so many of them, and they don't work together. So that's what I'm learning about this collection.
Yeah, well, there was no standard, was there? You just built
No.
what you built.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
okay, now we need a connector for it. Well, how many pins? And got to make sure it only goes in one way. Like, all right, I'll build one of those. And have you seen the American Epic documentary?
No. Mm-mm.
It's really, really good. It's basically a documentary, it's in 3 parts, but it's about very early records. And so it's about some of the people who recorded things. But then part of the documentary is about the recording system, which was a single mic with a capsule like that 47, but on a wooden box, which had all the tube electronics within it, that was connected directly to a lathe through a huge rack of equipment. I think it was mostly Western Electric stuff. And but it was portable in that it was a weight-driven lathe. So you'd crank a weight up.
Yes.
And then when you let it go, that was exactly enough, like with a clock, with a weight going, to cut one side of a record. And you had like 2 minutes and 11 seconds before the weight hit the floor, and then you were done cutting. So there's a lot of great documentary stuff about that. But then they also cut a lot of new artists. Like Beck does a song, Jack White does a song. There are a bunch of artists who come in and do the one mic in a room recording. And it's a really great example of how things have moved on too, because watching bands try and balance in a room now. And it's really hard. And some bands, no problem. And some bands, like the Beck one is amazing because he's got all these really fantastic ideas about how this is going to work. And then it's just completely untenable. Like you can't do what, like, because Roger Manning is at the piano, who's also in Jellyfish, just to tie it all together. And it starts off and he's playing, and by the end, he can't play because if he plays, then the choir doesn't work. And it's like this whole just amazing thing. And it's all because none of those microphones are meant to be part of a multi-mic setup.
No.
It's like that microphone is going out on the radio tonight, and we're doing the radio play. And the guy with the thunder sheet 6 feet away, and the actors are all grouped around. And so, it'll be interesting when you get them going to see how they kind of work in modern recording settings,
Hold on one second. You brought me, you mentioned something that I have to show you.
Excellent.
I'll be right back.
She'll be right back. In the meantime, I'm going to put up the tool picture again because it's amazing.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, tool picture's up. Because no one needs to see me. They need to see Maynard and Tom and Sylvia. All right, I'll come back to us then. That's all right. What's she got in her pockets? That's what I want to know.
It's going to be nuts. See,
there you go. That is very close to, in fact, that could be, now it's slightly different, but yeah, that's almost exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, imagine this, and here I'll switch cameras so you can see this. Imagine this this is like the first generation of condenser mic. But the first generation of an amplifier connected with the microphone. It's like all in one, right?
Yeah.
You've got the insides, you've got tubes in here. And this one, luckily, has only posts on the side. So there's already an XLR on this, and I can't wait to listen to that.
That's going to be amazing.
Go. Isn't it great? But yeah, this is the first generation Western Electric. It was in a wooden box, and then after that, there was kind of a tombstone box that the electronics were in, and then came the 47A, which was this bottom, and this became the idea for the German microphones too, the CMV3. So anyway, I'm just so excited and fascinated with these things. But that is a beauty.
Yeah.
That is, I'm so excited about microphones. I'm such a weirdo.
That's amazing.
It's great. We are all very much looking forward to the book.
Yes.
The encyclopedia.
Will there be an audio component to that?
I hope there will be a video component to that with we're going to have an online encyclopedia, and then we'll also hopefully do a video series where we can talk about each mic individually and the history and that. So yeah, look forward to that. That's going to be great. That's why we're kind of setting up this studio specifically for demonstration and to actually listen to these microphones and talk about them and then also record with them, which I can't wait. Can you
That's gonna be
imagine?
amazing.
I mean, can you imagine having 2,000 vintage mics of every color of the spectrum? Oh, man. Life is so good.
Right.
Life is so good. And that sounds like
Yeah.
the perfect place to end it, because life is great. And thank you so much for taking a huge chunk of your Monday and hanging
Oh my
out.
God. Well, it's a pleasure. Andrew, I respect you and your work, and we've known each other a long time, and
Blah,
I
blah,
appreciate
blah.
being
But
asked to be a part of this
of course,
series. Thank you.
it's
Thanks,
important.
Mark.
It's great. It's really great. And next week we have not just the man, but the senator, Jimmy Douglas, which I can't wait for. He's one of the
Right.
nicest guys I've ever met. And then you look at his discography and you kind of think, like, is the dude 100 years old? Like, how could he possibly have done all this stuff? It's incredible. So that should be quite good. But I really, really appreciate this, Sylvia. It's been amazing. So cool.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. And everybody who's watching, well, thank you for your questions and for sticking around for all that.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to go to the thanks for watching screen.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
everybody.
Puremix.
All right. Now I got to find my mouse cursor and mute the microphone. See you guys.